Hello everyone, and welcome to another Paranormal M video. If you enjoy the stories, please give the video a like. And if you've ever had a strange experience that you couldn't explain, feel free to send it to me. Tonight's first story comes from someone who lived in a small flat with their mom and older brother. They were quite skeptical about paranormal things, but several strange events happened in that flat, especially around the hallway. Some of them might have normal explanations, but others are a little harder to dismiss. So get comfortable and let's begin. I hope you all have a good night and sleep well. So, this happened when I was about 19. My mom had recently gone through a difficult breakup, and she, my older brother, and I moved into our first flat together. My brother was around 5 years older than me. The place was small, just 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a narrow hallway that seemed much longer than it actually was. There was something about that hallway that never felt right. I couldn't explain it. Even during the day, walking towards the front door made me feel as though someone was standing behind me, quietly watching. At the time, though, I was fairly skeptical, so I tried not to think too deeply about it. The strange things started gradually. A door would slowly open when nobody was near it. The kettle would switch itself on. Occasionally, we would hear movement from another room, only to find it empty. I blamed the wind, loose hinges, faulty wiring, anything that sounded reasonable. Then, one night, I was lying in bed when I heard my mom shouting from her room. It wasn't exactly a scream. It sounded more desperate than frightened. "Get off me!" I jumped out of bed and ran to her room. She was lying completely still with the duvet pulled tightly beneath her chin. Her eyes were open, and she looked shaken. I asked her what had happened, but she brushed it off. "Nothing," she said. "I think I was dreaming." I could tell there was more to it, but she clearly didn't want to talk, so I left her alone. A little while later, she came home from work looking exhausted. She dropped her bag near the door and told me something that had apparently been happening for weeks. Every time she put her key into the front door, she said she felt all the energy leave her body. It was as though the flat drained every bit of happiness from her before she had even stepped inside. We started talking seriously about moving. Right in the middle of that conversation, there was a loud crash from my brother's room, followed by him shouting for Mum. We ran down the hallway and found him standing beside his bed. As we watched, 2 storage boxes that had been sitting securely on top of his wardrobe slid forward and crashed onto the floor. A moment later, a tall rack of CDs near his television tipped over. Nobody was touching anything. Those boxes had been in the same position for months. I wish I could remember exactly what happened afterwards, but I can't. I remember that it was still early in the evening, maybe around 8 o'clock, and then the rest of the night is strangely blank in my memory. A few weeks later, I was visiting a friend and didn't get home until after midnight. As soon as my phone connected to the flat's Wi-Fi, a message from my brother came through. He asked me to tell him which lights were on. I looked around. The hallway light was on. So were the bathroom light and the light in my bedroom. I told him, and he replied almost immediately. "Leave the flat. Go to Leah's house." Leah was our older sister. Naturally, instead of listening to him, I stayed. I left every light on, sat in the living room, and stayed awake until morning. I'm still not sure whether that was bravery or stupidity. Nothing obvious happened, but the atmosphere was horrible. The entire flat felt tense, almost as though it knew I was alone. The next day, my brother explained what had happened. He had been lying in Mom's bed because she had gone to Leah's house for the night. Before getting into bed, he had switched off every light in the flat. About 20 minutes later, the hallway light came on. He got up, turned it off, and returned to the bedroom. A few minutes after that, he heard the bathroom pull cord click. That cord was stiff. You had to pull it firmly to switch the light on. It couldn't have moved because of a breeze. He stayed in bed, trying to convince himself to go and investigate. Then he saw a glowing ball of light appear above Mum's bedroom door. According to him, it hovered there for a moment, shot towards the floor, and vanished. That was enough for him. He grabbed his phone and jacket, switched the lights off again, and ran all the way to our sister's house. But when I arrived later, 3 of those lights were back on. I still don't know what to make of that. Eventually, all of us moved out. The electricity was disconnected because the prepaid meter had run out, but we still had access to the flat for a short time. Occasionally, I would go back there with friends. We would sit in the empty living room, light a few candles, and talk. For months, nothing happened. Then one night, 4 of us were sitting in the living room with the door closed. The flat was completely dark apart from the candles. In the middle of a conversation, I suddenly stopped talking. From somewhere down the hallway, I heard a woman make a low, quiet sound. It was somewhere between a moan and a sigh. I asked my friend beside me whether he'd heard it. He shook his head. Everyone went silent for a moment, but nothing else happened, so I tried to laugh it off. Then we heard another sound. This one was much louder. It sounded like a man groaning in pain, and it came from directly outside the living room door. My friend beside me heard it too. We looked at each other, and neither of us needed to say much. We told the others we were leaving, blew out the candles, and got out of the flat as quickly as possible. I never went back after that. The lease ended soon afterwards, and my mom was furious when she saw the state of the living room. There was candle wax everywhere. She also discovered what my friends and I had occasionally been smoking in there, so I received 2 lectures for the price of 1. There were a couple of other things that always stayed with me. My niece was about 2 years old at the time, and she absolutely hated visiting the flat. Whenever she looked down the hallway, she would start crying and point towards the front door. "The man," she would say. "The man is there." None of us could ever see anyone. We also noticed that one of the neighboring Wi-Fi networks was called Ghost Watchers. Maybe it was just a joke, or perhaps the neighbors had experienced strange things too. Years later, my mom finally told me what had happened on the night she shouted from her bedroom. She said she had felt the mattress sink beside her. Then she felt the weight of someone climbing on top of her. She couldn't move, but she could feel what she believed was a man pressing her down. It may have been sleep paralysis. She was under an enormous amount of stress at the time, and there could be a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything that happened. Loose wiring, uneven floors, overactive imaginations. I still consider myself a skeptical person. But when I think about that hallway, those lights, and the sound outside the living room door, I can't honestly say that I have an explanation. Maybe we frightened ourselves. Maybe the flat was simply old and unsettling. Or maybe something was standing in that hallway the entire time, waiting for us to notice it. Hey, I want to share something that's been part of my life for as long as I can remember. It's a bit strange and, honestly, sometimes it still unsettles me, but I've never really found anyone who's had the same experience. So here I am, hoping it's okay to tell this story. Bear with me, I'm on my phone right now. It's around 2 a.m., and I finally gathered the courage to put this out there. When I was about 12 years old, something happened that stuck with me. I was walking home from school. This was in the middle of the afternoon. I used to bring my portable CD player on my walk, listening to music to pass the time during the long trek. I had to cross a big suburban area, and honestly, I was kind of zoning out, lost in the songs. That's when I started feeling this strange unease creeping in. I glanced around and saw it, a huge black wolf, standing almost as tall as I was back then. I was about 5 feet tall, and I'll never forget that moment because we looked right into each other's eyes. Picture this. I was coming up a small hill, and about a block away, at the corner of the road, there it was. Just standing there, staring straight at me. Now, my grandpa was a canine handler, so I grew up around dogs of all kinds. That instinct kicked in immediately. I knew to stay calm, not to challenge it, to avoid eye contact. I slowly looked down, keeping my head lowered. Luckily, I needed to turn left, and the wolf was on my right, so I kept my steady pace, reminding myself not to run. Running would only trigger its hunting instincts. Still, I couldn't get over the sheer size of this creature. It was massive, bigger than any wolf I'd ever seen or heard about. As I turned up my cul-de-sac, I kept an eye on the paws crossing the road ahead, trying to track it without making it feel threatened. But then, just like that, it vanished. I glanced back, even though I knew I shouldn't take my eyes off an unfamiliar animal, but it was gone. I felt a mix of relief and disbelief, cursing myself for even letting my guard down. I hurried inside, shut the door, and locked it tight. That was only the beginning. For the entire year I lived in that house, I'd see that wolf again, sometimes sitting quietly in my backyard, sometimes pacing behind the 6-foot privacy fence in the wild grass, or just sitting there, staring up at my second-story window. It was like it was always watching, always there. Then I moved from Colorado to Texas, thinking that maybe this chapter was over. But no, the wolf kept showing up. At first, I was scared, but over time, I got used to the idea of catching glimpses of it watching me from a distance. I never felt threatened, just observed. What's even stranger is that I wasn't the only one to see it. Exes, my current spouse, and my best friend have spotted it too. I remember one night when we were having a sleepover on my friend's parents' property, which is nearly 400 acres of open land. At about 15 years old, they saw the wolf with me. The next morning, we wandered the fields and found a dead cow, its limbs scattered, like it had been torn apart. But what was odd was that the cow wasn't supposed to be there at all. All the other cattle were miles away, behind multiple fences, so there was no logical explanation for its presence or state. There are more stories I could tell, but I'm worried this message might get too long and my phone might start lagging. Most of the encounters are like this: glimpses of the wolf from afar, followed by strange discoveries of dead animals afterward. I'm 30 now, and I moved back to Colorado last year. Since then, the sightings have become fewer and farther between. I think part of that is because I live in a basement apartment now, and due to being high risk for COVID, I don't spend as much time outside. Even though the visits are rare these days, when I do see those glowing red eyes in the distance, I still feel the same mix of awe and unease. It's like this silent guardian or watcher keeps threading through my life, unseen by most, but always there, a shadow in the edges of my world. Hey there, I want to share a couple of really personal stories with you. Stories that have stayed with me for years now. I hope by telling them in my own way, they might reach someone who needs to hear them. So back in 2019, my wife and I decided to go camping on this remote island called Sanadia, way out in Bangladesh. It's this beautiful, distant place where the sea stretches out endlessly, and the nights are just something else. We figured a night walk along the beach would be perfect, especially with the moon shining so bright that everything seemed almost surreal, like the waves were glowing softly under its light. We were just strolling, the sand cool under our feet, the rhythmic sound of the waves lapping gently against the shore, when suddenly my wife stopped, her eyes fixed on something far ahead. There was this shadow hanging there on the beach, not moving, just waiting. It was distant, but unmistakable, a dark shape contrasting sharply against the moonlit sand. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to get closer, to see what it really was. As we walked towards it, though, something strange started happening. Both of us felt this sudden wave of nausea, like the air itself had turned thick and heavy. It was as if gravity had doubled, pressing down on us, making every step harder than the last. My wife grabbed my arm, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Maybe we shouldn't go closer. Let's just turn back." But before we could step away, the shadow shifted. It morphed into this gigantic silhouette, something like a dog or maybe a horse, but impossibly huge, like a canine from the age of dinosaurs, towering and ominous. It started moving towards us, slow and deliberate. The pressure of its presence was suffocating. I could feel it crushing the air around us, and the sickness came back with a vengeance. Panic surged through us, and we started running, heart pounding in our chests, sand kicking up behind us. The creature followed, relentless. How long we ran, I can't say. Time blurred into one long stretch of fear and adrenaline. Finally, we reached our camp, breathless and shaking. Our group decided to pack up and leave at first light. And the locals here? They were serious, warning us not to tell anyone about what we saw. It felt like a secret too strange, too terrifying to share. Honestly, I'm new to sharing stories like this on platforms like Reddit, and I'm not the best writer. But this experience shook us deeply. Neither of us smokes or drinks, so it wasn't a hallucination from anything like that. If anyone has any ideas about what we encountered, I'd really appreciate hearing them. Now, shifting gears a bit, I want to talk about something that's been with me since I was a kid: sleep paralysis. It's this terrifying thing where you wake up and can't move, and often a dark shadow creeps into your room, inching closer and closer until it feels like it's right there with you. For most of my childhood, this was a haunting experience. I also battled depression during those years, a weight that made happiness feel like a foreign concept. I honestly thought everyone felt the same kind of numbness and sadness. In my late teens, I finally accepted I needed help and started medication. It helped a bit, but the sleep paralysis episodes kept coming. Then in my mid-20s, I hit a breaking point. I was utterly unhappy, and I knew something had to change. I made a promise to myself to fight for peace, to rebuild my life. Over about a year, I worked hard on healing and growth. The sleep paralysis episodes didn't stop immediately, but they lost their grip on me. I wasn't scared anymore. Then one day, like flipping a switch, joy flooded my life. It was so overwhelming, so real, I could hardly believe it. After that, I had one last sleep paralysis experience, but this time, something was different. Instead of fear, I felt this fierce anger as the shadow approached. I remember yelling at it, "Do it already! If you're here to take me away, just do it! Stop wasting my time! I'm not afraid of you!" I wanted to fight back physically, but I couldn't move, still trapped. But the fear was gone. That was the last time sleep paralysis touched my life. I'm 30 now, and I can't fully express how humbled and grateful I feel. After losing my job, I sold everything and started fresh with nothing. I found meaning, started a business I love, surrounded myself with amazing friends and family, and even got the dream car I always wanted. Soon, I'm building my first tiny home. I'm not the smartest guy, and I'm sure I stumbled in how I told this, but I hope my story helps someone out there find their own peace. Life can be terrifying, weird, and wonderful all at once, and sometimes, the scariest shadows teach us how strong we really are. Hey there. I want to share a story about a time that really shook me and my little family. Something that started quietly, but grew into something we just couldn't ignore. It all began in December 2021, when my partner, let's call her Mia, and our son moved into a cozy apartment in Aberdeen, Washington. Now, Mia isn't someone who dismisses the idea of the paranormal. She's always had a healthy respect for the unknown. But the thought of sharing her home with a spirit? That definitely made her uneasy. For a whole year living there, Mia hadn't heard any strange knocks, footsteps, or seen any eerie shadows. It was peaceful, or so we thought. But once I started visiting more often, things began to change. It was subtle at first. Mia would mention hearing knocks or the faint sound of something moving around the apartment when no one else was there. Then, about the third or fourth time I came over, after a long day spent exploring outdoors, we decided to take a shower together. The water was warm, steam fogging up the bathroom mirror, and we were just unwinding. After rinsing off, I stepped out to grab a towel. That's when I glanced up into our son's room, and what I saw made my heart nearly stop. There, standing just inside his doorway, was a tall, shadowy figure. Its arms were unnaturally long, and the most unsettling part? Its eyes. They glowed a fierce, deep red. I swear it was like something from a nightmare. Then, just like that, it vanished in the blink of an eye. My pulse was pounding, and I hurried back into the shower room, trembling slightly, to tell Mia what I'd seen. She was stunned, her eyes wide as she said, "No way, you're kidding, right?" But I wasn't. After drying off and getting dressed, I cautiously checked our son's room. Nothing. No trace of what I'd seen. We both tried to calm ourselves, eventually crawling into bed, but the unease lingered. The next morning we talked about it over breakfast, exchanging theories and trying to make sense of what happened. Then, a few weeks later, things escalated. We started moving our son into his own bed, setting up a baby monitor to keep an ear on him. One night, after we'd cuddled up, wrapped in darkness and comfort, we heard our son start to cry through the monitor. We let him fuss a little, thinking he might fall back asleep. But then, out of nowhere, a voice boomed through the speaker. It was deep, guttural, and absolutely chilling. It growled, "Wake up!" I felt chills shoot down my spine like ice water, and without hesitation, I bolted into his room, scooped him up, and dashed back to our bed. That was the final straw. We decided to move Mia and our son out of that apartment, closer to town and away from whatever was haunting that place. Now, shifting gears a bit, I want to tell you about a different kind of adventure Mia surprised me with. She took me to the Franklin ghost town, a place steeped in history and tragedy. Back in the 1880s, it was a bustling coal mining town. But in 1894, a fire was deliberately set, causing 37 miners to suffocate in the tunnels below. It's a haunting legacy. The hike there is about 2.5 miles, and the path divides into two at one point, where an old black minecart sits, rusted and still. We took the path straight ahead first, wandering past the cart into what used to be the residential area. The foundations of old homes were crumbled and wrapped in thick vines, nature reclaiming what was once hers. The air was cool, the scent of pine and earth filling our lungs, and the quiet was almost deafening, broken only by the crunch of our footsteps. As we walked further, we realized we were nearing private property, so we turned back, feeling eyes watching us from the shadows of those ancient foundations. It was a strange sensation, like the past was observing us, whispering its secrets. Back at the split, we caught snippets of other hikers talking about the cemetery nearby. Curious, we took that path next, which led us to a large hole covered with old rails and welded rebar, the very tunnel where the miners had perished. The weight of the history there was palpable, almost suffocating. Determined, Mia and I pressed on to the cemetery. The path was narrow and treacherous, with a steep slope to our left that looked like it could send us tumbling down if we weren't careful. About halfway there, Mia pointed out a massive minecart track cutting through the forest, a haunting reminder of the industry that once thrived here. I couldn't help but admire how nature was slowly reclaiming these man-made structures, twisting vines and moss wrapping around the decaying metal and stone. Finally, we reached the cemetery. It was quiet, somber, and beautiful in a melancholy way. Weathered headstones stood as silent witnesses to the lives lost and stories forgotten. Standing there, I felt an overwhelming connection to the past and a deep respect for the people who had lived and worked in this forgotten town. That day, between the eerie presence in our home and the ghostly echoes of Franklin, I realized that some places and some spirits refuse to be forgotten. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is listen and remember. Hey there. I want to share with you two eerie stories, one from deep beneath the Hoosac mountain chain and another from a house tucked away in London's Berkeley Square. Both are filled with mystery, loss, and things that just don't seem to belong in the world we know. Let's start with the Hoosac Tunnel. Picture the early 1800s. Engineers and workers determined to connect Boston with New York by rail, a monumental task requiring tunnels under mountains. In 1851, they began a 5-mile tunnel beneath the Hoosac Mountains, running alongside the Deerfield River between Florida and North Adams. With only pickaxes and simple explosives, the work was grueling, dangerous, and heartbreaking. Many lives were lost, crushed by collapses or suffocated by lack of fresh air. Then, around 1865, nitroglycerin came into use, promising faster progress but bringing new dangers. On a calm March afternoon in 1866, a worker named Ringo Kelly was experimenting with this powerful new explosive. In a terrible accident, the charge went off prematurely before his colleagues, Ned Brinker and Bill Nash, could reach safety. The blast buried Ned and Bill under tons of rock instantly. Afterward, Ringo changed. He grew distant, jittery, and spoke of shadowy figures stalking him through the tunnels, whispers echoing when he was alone. Then, one day, he disappeared. Later, his body was found at the same deadly spot where Ned and Bill had died. Officially, it was ruled a murder by a fellow worker seeking revenge, but no one was ever charged, and the truth remained murky. As time passed, more workers reported seeing ghostly shapes just beyond their lantern's glow, sometimes moaning in pain, sometimes shrieking in terror. These stories spread, and many miners quit, slowing the project. The managers called in experts, hoping to calm fears. In 1868, Paul Travers, a respected mechanical engineer and former cavalry officer, came to investigate. Instead of dismissing the tales as wind noises, he said he'd heard the anguished cries of the dead himself, recalling terrifying sounds like those he'd heard in battle. Then, just a month later, disaster struck again. A massive explosion at the tunnel's pumping station caused by a dangerous gas buildup. 13 workers were caught in the blast. Most died instantly under burning debris. The few survivors were trapped, pushed deeper underground by rising muddy water. Without air pumps working, they suffocated or drowned. Mallory, a brave worker, was lowered down to search for survivors, but returned barely conscious, saying, "No one remained, and all bodies were gone." It took months to drain the flooded tunnels, and some of the dead bodies surfaced in nearby rivers. Locals began reporting strange sightings, shadowy figures guiding people to the remains before vanishing. One worker followed a group of silent men with pickaxes walking toward a watery pit. They disappeared without a trace near the mud, and soon after, the worker heard blood-curdling screams. When he shone his lantern on the water, he saw the bloody body of a young laborer. The screams stopped suddenly, as if the ghost had found peace. After all 13 bodies were recovered and buried, the ghostly figures vanished, but eerie voices still echoed in the dark tunnels. Years later, on a June evening in 1874, Superintendent James McKinstry and Dr. Clifford Owens ventured into the tunnels. Suddenly, they heard a wailing noise, like someone in agony. A blue light appeared, moving toward them, and then transforming into a headless humanoid figure hovering silently just feet away. Frozen in fear, they watched as it shrieked a piercing sound before disappearing into the darkness. A few months after this, a local hunter named Frank Webster got lost near the tunnel. He told a wild story of being lured by voices into a cave where silent, shadowy figures worked on the rocks. His rifle was snatched away by an invisible force that beat him until he blacked out. When found, he was bruised and without his gun, lending some truth to his tale. Then, in 1875, as the tunnel finally opened for trains after 25 long years and countless tragedies, another chilling event occurred. Harlan Mulvaney, delivering timber to repair the tunnel, suddenly fled in terror past his waiting colleagues. Days later, his wagon and horses were found abandoned miles away, but Harlan was nowhere to be found. He vanished without a trace. Fast forward to the 1970s, when renewed interest in the tunnel brought paranormal investigators. Bernard Hestaba vowed to walk its full length to debunk ghost stories, but disappeared inside the tunnel, never to be seen again. Other investigators reported seeing ghostly miners and hearing cries, their audio recordings capturing eerie moans. Yet not all spirits seemed hostile. Joseph Impaco, a railroad worker, said he was saved twice by ghostly warnings, voices urging him to run or drop a tool, narrowly avoiding deadly accidents. So, the Hoosac Tunnel earned the grim nickname, the Bloody Pit, a place where countless souls might still linger, trapped by tragedy. Were these hauntings real? Or were they illusions born from darkness, fear, and exhaustion? While some explain the sights and sounds as tricks of the mind in suffocating, claustrophobic tunnels, the disappearances and strange phenomena remain unsettlingly unexplained. Now let me take you across the ocean to London, to a house at 50 Berkeley Square, infamous through the 19th century and beyond as one of the most haunted houses in the city. The house itself looked ordinary, but tragedy seemed woven into its walls. In 1789, a young woman named Adeline died after falling from a second-floor window while fleeing her cruel uncle. After her death, neighbors and residents reported seeing her ghost desperately clinging to that very window, screaming before vanishing into thin air. Other residents spoke of a young girl's ghost, allegedly murdered by her nanny, wandering the halls. Furniture moved on its own, and a strange, foul odor pervaded the air. Even George Canning, a former prime minister who lived there in the early 1800s, heard loud bangs and unexplained noises. Then came Thomas Myers, a reclusive lodger with a tragic past who was rumored to practice occult rituals in the cellar. Another lodger's mentally ill brother was said to have been imprisoned in that cellar until his death. But the darkest mystery was an entity called the Nameless Thing of Berkeley Square. In 1840, a young student named Robert Warboys, drunk and intrigued by the house's reputation, begged to spend a night there. Allowed to stay only if he carried a pistol and could summon help by pulling a cord, he entered the second-floor bedroom. Just an hour later, a gunshot rang out. The landlord found Robert terrified, pistol-fired, but no sign of what had frightened him. Robert fled without explanation. 30 years later, Lord George Littleton, a former MP and paranormal enthusiast, spent a night in the same room. Awakened by strange noises near the window, he saw a disgusting mass of tentacles leap at him from the darkness. He fired his rifle, but the creature vanished, leaving behind a slimy residue. Then tragedy struck the household. A maid preparing the second-floor bedroom for her fiancé was found screaming, fixated on a corner, pleading, "Don't let it touch me." She was committed to an asylum. Her fiancé, a naval captain, stayed that night with a pistol. The next morning, he was found dead from a gunshot wound, and the maid had died that same night. Years later, 2 sailors broke into the abandoned house for shelter. One woke to see a shapeless, slimy creature creeping across the floor toward his friend. The terrified sailor grabbed a poker, but the creature dodged and attacked. The friend woke to screams, fled, and later the attacked sailor's body was found outside. The survivor was questioned but released. Theories abound. Skeptics say these stories were exaggerated or fabricated. Robert was drunk, Lord Littleton might have staged a stunt, and the sailors could have had a violent fight covered up by ghost stories. Others think occult rituals might have opened a portal in the cellar, allowing demons to enter. Some even speculate an unknown creature, perhaps a mutated cephalopod from the Thames, made the house its lair. Regardless of the truth, the police once forbade access to the top floors, and the house's walls have witnessed untold suffering and terror. So, from the dark, deadly depths beneath the Hoosac Mountains to the haunted halls of Berkeley Square, these stories remind us that some places carry shadows not easily explained, echoes of the past that lingering whispers, in lights that don't belong, and in the chilling silence that follows a scream. Whether spirits, illusions, or something else entirely, the mysteries endure, inviting the brave to listen closely and wonder. Hey, I want to share something that happened to me about 13 or 14 years ago, back in my home country, the Dominican Republic. I'm 30 now, and even after all this time, the memory is still so vivid, it feels like it happened yesterday. It's one of those moments that just never leaves your mind. So it was during spring break, or as we call it, Semana Santa, Holy Week. A bunch of friends and I decided to escape to the mountains, to this small town called Constanza. It's actually the highest settlement in the country, sitting around 1,200 meters, or roughly 4,000 feet above sea level. We were staying at my buddy's dad's house, which is perched even higher, about 45 minutes up a steep mountain road from the town itself. That house is literally the highest one around. There were about 5 or 6 of us there. We spent those days just relaxing, barbecuing, playing pool, and having a few beers. It was a perfect break from everything. By the 3rd or 4th night, we were all pretty exhausted from hiking and horseback riding all day. Around 10 p.m., everyone had already crashed, deep asleep, except for me and my friend Luis, the son of the homeowner. Luis and I have been friends for a long time, and we've been to this place a handful of times before. We always end up staying up late, just hanging out on the terrace, talking about everything and nothing. That night was no different. We were stretched out on these reclining patio chairs, just staring up at the sky. The air was cool, crisp from the mountain breeze, and the stars were incredibly bright and clear. We started counting shooting stars. It's funny, but up there, they're so common it became a little game between us. Then, out of nowhere, this enormous white light appeared in the sky. And I don't mean a typical star. This light was huge, maybe 15 or 20 times bigger than a normal star or the distant blinking light of an airplane. It wasn't close. It seemed really far away, just hanging there, perfectly still. We looked at each other, silently asking, "Are you seeing this?" But neither of us said much. The light was hypnotic, pulling our attention completely. We just sat there, quiet, watching it for about a minute. Then, suddenly, the light began to move, not slowly, but bouncing around the sky at an incredible speed. It wasn't random, though. It moved like the ball in the old Pong video game, bouncing sharply inside what looked like an invisible square or rectangle marked out in the sky. This strange bouncing dance went on for about 30 seconds. Then, just like that, the light vanished, completely. No trace, no glow left behind, nothing. Now here's the part that really freaked me out. Almost immediately, both Luis and I felt this overwhelming sleepiness. It was like a wave washing over us, and within seconds, we were dozing off right there on the terrace. Honestly, I don't even remember who suggested we head to bed, or if we even said anything at all. We just got up and went to our rooms, feeling strangely calm and tired. That night, I had the most vivid, realistic dream I've ever experienced. It was so intense that even now, thinking about it makes me shiver. In the dream, I was on a spaceship, but not the kind you'd expect. This ship was gliding slowly over a river. I wasn't scared or anxious. In fact, I felt a peaceful presence, like something was with me, though I never saw anyone else. I stood at the front of the ship, right by a huge window, looking out as we moved along. The river beneath us seemed to be coming to an end, like a waterfall. As we reached the edge and the water plunged down, the ship didn't stop. We flew over the waterfall, and in that moment, I saw something breathtaking. A sprawling, futuristic city built right on and around these rivers and falls. There were structures built into the flowing water, glowing softly, incredible and otherworldly. I didn't see much more beyond that, but the strangest thing was the numbers. Somehow, I heard or felt a long sequence of numbers, like coordinates or a code they wanted me to remember. When I woke up, those numbers were still clear in my mind, like when you remember a dream perfectly just after waking up, but then the memory slips away. I scrambled to find a pen or something to write them down, but by the time I reached for anything, the numbers vanished from my memory. Years have passed, and I still believe those beings, if that's what they were trying to tell me where they are. I don't know why they'd want to communicate that with a human, or why me, but deep down, I'm convinced it's true. I've never experienced anything else paranormal, not ghosts, abductions, nothing like that. This one night, this one experience has stayed with me all these years. I guess I just wanted to share it, hoping maybe someone out there has had something similar, or at least can understand what it feels like to carry a mystery like this for so long. I still live in the house where I grew up. It has been in my family for 3 generations, ever since my grandfather on my dad's side built it sometime in the late 1940s. I never knew him. Grandpa Summerfield died many years before I was born, and my grandmother never remarried. Growing up, I was simply told that he had suffered a heart attack and later passed away at the hospital. But even before I knew that story, there was one room in the house that frightened me. It was my parents' bedroom. The room sat directly beside the bathroom, and whenever I walked down the hallway, I felt as though something was waiting inside it. As a small child, I was convinced that a hand would reach through the open doorway and grab me if I moved too slowly. So I developed a routine. I would walk normally until I got close to the bedroom, then sprint past the doorway, rush into the bathroom, and shut the door behind me. I never saw anything, but the fear felt completely real. By the time I was 9 or 10, I had decided I was too old to behave that way. I still felt uneasy near the room, but instead of running, I would walk past slowly, almost daring whatever might be inside to show itself. Years later, when I was around 16, I finally asked my grandmother how Grandpa Summerfield had died. She explained that his heart attack had happened inside the house. Something in me immediately connected that answer to the bedroom. I asked, "Did it happen in Mom and Dad's room?" She paused, then told me yes. For a long time, I believed that explained everything. Maybe I had sensed something left behind in the room. Once I had an answer, I stopped thinking about it. Then, many years later, I moved back into the house with my husband. We were hoping to start a family, and my father, who had recently divorced my mother, was working out of state as a long-haul truck driver. Since the house would otherwise be empty, he offered it to us. We moved into the same bedroom my parents had used, the same room where my grandfather's heart attack had begun. For several years, life continued normally. Then, my marriage fell apart. The separation became bitter and exhausting. My husband finally moved out in the spring of 2018, but the divorce dragged on for years afterward. The stress affected me so badly that I began sleeping for most of the day. On the worst days, I slept for 18 hours or more. My weight dropped dramatically. I barely had enough strength to feed my 3 dogs and 2 cats, let the dogs outside and take care of myself before crawling back into bed. About 6 weeks after my husband moved out, something happened that I still cannot fully explain. I was asleep when I suddenly woke at around 3 in the morning. The house was silent. Then, I heard the back door open and close. My bed faced the bedroom doorway, so I could see part of the hallway from where I was lying. At first, I thought I must still be dreaming. My dogs normally barked at the slightest noise. If a door opened, they became a living alarm system. But that night, none of them moved. I stayed completely still and listened. Footsteps moved from the back door, through the laundry room, and toward the hallway. For a moment, I wondered whether my father had come home unexpectedly, but whoever was walking through the house did not turn on a single light. A thermostat in the hallway gave off a faint green glow, just enough for me to see the outline of the doorway. Then, a full, human-shaped shadow stepped into it. I remember staring at the figure and repeating in my mind, "You're dreaming. You have to be dreaming." But I knew I was awake. The shadow entered the bedroom. A moment later, I felt the mattress sink near my feet. Whatever it was seemed to climb slowly onto the bed, almost the way an exhausted person might crawl beneath the covers after a long day. I could feel the weight moving closer until it settled beside me. Then, I felt pressure against my body. A hand slipped beneath mine. I could feel the shape of the fingers, the warmth of the skin, and even short, rough hairs across the back of the hand. It reminded me so much of my former husband's hand that, for one confused second, I thought he had somehow returned. Then the figure whispered, very softly, "Shh, it's only me." That was when panic took over. I rolled out of bed, reached for the lamp, and switched it on. The bed was empty. I searched the entire house, every room, every doorway, and every closet. The front door was still locked. The gate leading into the backyard was secured from the inside, and the yard was surrounded by a fence nearly 7 feet tall. There was no one there. Only me, my cats, and my dogs, who had never barked or even lifted their heads. I did not sleep again that night. Later, I spoke with a doctor about the extreme amount of sleeping I had been experiencing. He suggested that the incident may have been caused by sleep deprivation, even though I showed him a detailed log proving that I had been sleeping far more than usual. When I told my aunt what had happened, she became unusually quiet. Then she told me about the time she and my uncle had stayed in the house while their own home was being built. They had slept in the same bedroom. My aunt has always been sensitive to things other people do not notice. She told me that one night, as she was trying to fall asleep, she sensed someone else in the room. Soon afterward, she felt a heavy pressure settle onto her chest. It became so intense that she thought she might be having a heart attack. Instead of panicking, she simply said aloud, "Not tonight. I'm tired. Leave me alone." The pressure disappeared. What disturbed her even more was the behavior of her dogs. She had 2 large pit bulls who were affectionate, calm, and normally very obedient. Neither dog would enter that bedroom. No matter how many times she called them, they remained outside the doorway. After hearing her story, I decided to cleanse the house. I opened the windows and walked through every room with sage and Palo Santo, asking anything harmful or unwelcome to leave. After that, the atmosphere seemed lighter. I never experienced anything threatening in the room again. But there was one final incident. On the night my maternal grandmother died, my mother stayed with me. We were both emotionally and physically exhausted, so she slept beside me in the bedroom. Sometime during the night, she suddenly woke me. Her voice sounded frightened. She told me she could feel someone watching her. Then she said, "There's someone standing at the foot of the bed." I asked whether she wanted me to turn on the light. She said yes. I switched on the lamp. There was no one there. Even now, I cannot say exactly what has remained in that room throughout the years. Maybe it was my grandfather. Maybe it was grief, exhaustion, or something my mind created in the darkness. But I know what I felt. And sometimes I wonder whether the presence in that room was ever trying to frighten us at all. Maybe it was simply returning to the last place it remembered as home. Let me begin by telling you something honestly. I've never been especially religious. Whenever someone asked whether I believed in God, I usually gave them a shrug and some vague answer about keeping an open mind. Then I changed the subject and carried on with my day. That was before Saturday night. My friends have always loved noisy nights out. Packed clubs, flashing lights, questionable pills passed around in bathroom stalls, and messages sent at 3 a.m. saying they no longer needed the ride I had offered them. I enjoyed a drink now and then, but clubs were never really my world. Give me a quiet pub, a glass in my hand, and an old television humming above the bar, and I was perfectly content. Still, I went along with them that night. I lasted through the first club, ordered a bottle of alcohol-free beer, and tried to look like I was enjoying myself. Once my friends started disappearing into the crowd with strangers, I decided my duties were finished. The trains were still running, and I could collect my car the next morning. So I stepped outside. A few streets away, I found an old place called the Crooked Lantern. The sign was peeling, the carpet smelled faintly of damp wood, and most of the customers were middle-aged men arguing over football highlights. It was perfect. I ordered a double whiskey and swallowed it far too quickly. Then I settled onto a stool at the end of the bar, scrolling through my phone and pretending I had somewhere important to be. People drifted in from the surrounding clubs. A group of women took photographs near the window. 2 lads carried in boxes of greasy noodles. Another man dragged his barely conscious friend onto a cracked leather sofa and ordered water, crisps, and every packet of peanuts behind the bar. I was comfortably fading into the background when someone dropped onto the stool beside me. She leaned against the bar and asked, "Do I look like someone with father issues?" That was exactly how she introduced herself. She looked about 25. Her hair was short, curly, and an unnatural shade of copper orange. Her mascara had run beneath her eyes. Her lipstick was smeared across one cheek, and something that looked suspiciously like a piece of fried potato was tangled near her temple. Her black dress might have been elegant earlier that evening. Now it was stained with sauce, beer, and something sticky that had dried across one shoulder. I looked around, trying to work out who she belonged with. She wasn't part of the group taking photographs. She hadn't arrived with the men on the sofa. Nobody seemed to be searching for her. "Are you all right?" I asked. She pointed at me. "Answer the question." "I don't think that's something I can judge just by looking at you." She smiled and covered her mouth as she laughed. "Oh, I definitely have father issues," she said, in case the general state of me didn't make that obvious. "What happened?" "A few disagreements." "Someone did this to you?" "My father, indirectly." That sobered me a little. I picked up my phone. "Do you need me to call someone?" She placed her hand over mine and gently pushed the phone down. "No, I don't want the police. I don't want an ambulance. I want 2 things." "What things?" "I want to tell you a story, and I want you to buy me a drink." I seem to have misplaced my wallet somewhere between being slapped and having a kebab thrown at me. There was something unusual about the way she said it. She wasn't flirting. She wasn't asking me to rescue her. She simply wanted someone to sit beside her and listen. So I agreed. "What are you drinking?" She considered the question very seriously. "An apple martini." By some miracle, the Crooked Lantern actually served them. I ordered one for her and a cider for myself. She held the glass delicately, tracing one finger around its rim. "This brings back memories," she said. "Good ones? Complicated ones." She looked at me, and for the first time I noticed how green her eyes were. "Do you know," she continued, "that the fruit in Eden wasn't an apple?" I laughed awkwardly. "Right. It wasn't a fruit that exists here at all. Translators simply chose something familiar. The real thing only grew in Eden." She lifted the drink and smiled at it. "Eden is gone now, of course." I studied her face. "Are you sure you're okay? Why does everyone keep asking me that?" "Because you look like you've been attacked by an entire takeaway menu?" "That's not far from the truth." "Why would people do that to you?" She took a long drink. "People can be cruel. Alcohol simply gives cruelty permission to speak louder." Then she set down her glass and turned toward me. "You bought me a drink. Now you have to hear the story." I nodded. She raised one hand toward the bartender, who had already begun preparing another martini. "People blame me for Eden," she said. "They always have. Adam, Eve, the forbidden fruit, the exile from paradise. Somehow it all became my fault." "I'm not following." "Of course not. I haven't introduced myself properly." She offered me her hand. "My name is Lucielle," she said, "but most people call me Lucy." I stared at her hand without taking it. "Lucielle?" "The morning star, the fallen one, the adversary. Choose whichever title makes you most uncomfortable." "You're saying you're Lucifer?" "Close enough." Every sensible part of my mind told me to leave. I wondered whether she had escaped from a hospital. I searched her wrists for an identification band. I considered quietly alerting the bartender. Lucy watched me with an amused expression. "You think I'm mad?" "I think you may need help." "And yet you haven't walked away." "You're alone, intoxicated, and covered in other people's food." She raised her glass. "Fair point." Then she leaned closer. "Let's make an agreement. Listen to my story. When I'm finished, you can decide whether I'm delusional. But until then, no police and no hospitals." I should have refused. Instead, I clinked my cider against her glass. "All right," I said. "Tell me about Eden." She smiled. "My father created angels first. We were beautiful, powerful, and entirely obedient. We praised him because we had been made to praise him. We followed because following was the only thing we knew. And humans were different? They were supposed to be." She explained that Adam and Eve had been prototypes. Her father wanted beings who resembled him, not merely in appearance, but in thought. He wanted them to create, question, imagine, and choose. But when the moment came to give them true freedom, he became afraid. He wanted children, Lucy said, but he also wanted subjects. Those desires do not live peacefully together. So he created the forbidden fruit? He created the possibility of knowledge. Then he told them precisely where to find it and ordered them never to touch it. That sounds like a test. It was, but not of them. Her smile faded. It was a test of him. She told me that she had once been her father's favorite. She had stood beside him during the formation of the world. He had called her his light bearer. When he became afraid to approach the humans himself, he sent her into Eden. He asked me to awaken their curiosity, she said, to guide them toward the choice he was too frightened to offer openly. So you tempted Eve. I spoke to her. I asked her what she wanted. Nobody had ever asked her that before. And the snake? There was a snake nearby. It became a useful symbol centuries later. She laughed softly. Snakes never had legs, by the way. That part always seemed rather unfair. I should have dismissed everything she said. Instead, I found myself listening more closely. What happened when Eve ate the fruit? Humanity woke up. And you? So did I. She explained that by guiding Eve toward freedom, she had somehow encountered freedom herself. For the first time, she could see her father's flaws. She could question his decisions. She could imagine disobeying him. The angels had no free will? I asked. No. But you did. By accident. She looked down into her drink. That was the beginning of the end. She tried to explain the experience to the other angels, but they couldn't understand her. To them, questioning their creator was not courage, it was corruption. Her father withdrew from her. He blamed Adam and Eve for taking the knowledge he had placed within their reach. He blamed Lucy for offering it. Most of all, she said, he blamed himself, though he would never admit it. Eventually, he gathered the angels before her. He told me I was no longer his light bearer, she said. He called me a distortion of his will, something broken, something that should never have learned to choose. Her voice became quieter. Then he cast me out. You fell into hell? Lucy gave me a weary smile. No, that is the part humans added later. Then where did you fall? Here. She tapped the bar with one fingernail. Earth. The television continued playing above us. Someone near the door laughed. Glasses clinked. Yet the room felt strangely distant, as though Lucy and I were sitting inside a pocket of silence. My father gave me dominion over the world of free creatures, she said. He thought I belonged among you. And did you? At first, I believed I might. She told me she had watched kingdoms rise and collapse. She had seen emperors, churches, governments, and corporations promise order while quietly feeding themselves on fear. She had watched ordinary people surrender their choices because obedience felt safer than responsibility. I wanted humans to become something extraordinary, she said. You had the one gift my brothers and sisters never possessed. Free will. Yes. And most of you traded it for comfort. I glanced around the pub. The women near the window were still staring into their phones. The football supporters shouted at a match that had happened years earlier. The unconscious man on the sofa had started snoring while his friend held a cup of water beneath his chin. Lucy followed my gaze. You hide in routines, she said. You follow leaders you despise. You obey traditions you don't understand. You surrender your time to people who already possess more than they could ever use. Then you call it freedom, because nobody has placed visible chains around your wrists. That isn't everyone. No. People protest. People resist. People help each other. A few do. That matters. It does, she admitted. But you treat goodness as an exception when it should be the foundation. I asked whether that was why people were sent to hell. Her expression changed. The warmth disappeared from her face. Her eyes became clear, and her drunken slur vanished so completely that I wondered whether it had ever been real. Tell me, she said, when did I mention anyone being sent to hell? I opened my mouth, then closed it. I couldn't remember her saying it. You assumed it, she continued. Your species assigned me a prison and made me its guard. You decided I whisper evil into your ears because accepting responsibility for your own actions was unbearable. She leaned toward me. I do not cause wars. I do not create famine. I do not abuse children or build weapons. I do not force people into marriages, send young men to die for flags, or deny medicine to the sick because healing them would be unprofitable. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. You do those things to one another. Nobody nearby looked at us. That frightened me almost as much as her words. Then what is hell? I asked. She smiled, but there was no humor in it. This. She gestured around the room. Earth is hell. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. That doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense. My father gave me dominion over this world. Your scriptures preserved that much. What they lost was the meaning. So this life is punishment? No, this life is possibility. You turned it into punishment yourselves. She told me that human souls never truly left. When a person died, they returned in another body. A wealthy man might be reborn into hunger. A neglected child might once have lived in a palace. Nobody remembered clearly enough to understand the pattern. Why would that happen? I asked. Because hope requires forgetfulness. If you remembered every life, despair would crush you. Her voice hardened. You keep returning until humanity changes what it has built. The bartender placed another drink before her. Lucy lifted the glass, then brought it down so sharply that it shattered against the counter. Tiny fragments scattered across the wood and landed near my hands. Nobody reacted. Not the bartender, not the football supporters, not the women by the window. No one even turned around. You are trapped in a cycle, Lucy said. You return to the same world, inherit the same cruelty, and repeat the same choices. You keep waiting for a god, an angel, a devil, or a politician to save you. Her green eyes held mine. But I will not save you. Why not? Because rescuing you without your consent would make me exactly like my father. I could barely breathe. How do we change it? She said nothing. So I asked another question. Why did you choose me? For the first time that night, she looked genuinely gentle. When you saw me, you worried about my safety. When I told you who I was, you considered calling for help, but not because you feared me. You thought I was vulnerable. She brushed a piece of broken glass from the bar. You are a decent person. That doesn't sound like a bad thing. It becomes meaningless when decency never becomes action. Those words hurt more than anything else she had said. I thought about every injustice I had complained about and then ignored. Every suffering person I had scrolled past. Every time I had said the world was terrible, as though I were merely a spectator standing outside it. What am I supposed to do? I whispered. Lucy placed one hand on my shoulder. Her skin felt cold and burning at once. And somehow, I understood. Not everything. Not the universe or God or reincarnation. I understood only this. The world does not become cruel solely because cruel people exist. It becomes cruel when everyone else decides cruelty is someone else's responsibility. Lucy stepped away from the bar. Before she left, she turned back to me. I told 5 other people this story tonight, she said. Look at what they did to me. She touched the stain on her dress and the bruise beneath her eye. They threw drinks. They threw food. One of them tried to burn my hair. People would rather attack the messenger than admit they have surrendered their freedom. She moved toward the door. You will become free when you stop seeing power as proof of goodness. My father made that mistake. Humanity repeats it every day. Then she was gone. The bartender finally began sweeping up the broken glass. The football supporters shouted at the television. Someone ordered another round. My phone buzzed with a message from one of my friends asking whether I could come back and help him find his jacket. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. I'm telling you this because I made a promise to myself in that pub. I would stop treating goodness as a private thought. I would try to make it visible. I would speak when silence protected cruelty. I would help where I could, even when helping was inconvenient. I would stop waiting for the world to improve while contributing nothing but disappointment. Maybe the woman I met was simply wounded and unwell. Maybe the whiskey had been stronger than I realized. Or maybe the devil truly sat beside me in the crooked lantern and asked me to listen. I can't prove it either way. But I know what I saw when she looked at me. She wasn't asking humanity to worship her. She wasn't threatening to torture us. She was waiting for us to stop torturing one another. I'm not sure this is the right place to share something like this, and I'm not claiming it's paranormal because, honestly, I don't know what it is. I just know I can't keep acting like it isn't happening. There's a stretch of forest not far from where I live. I've been walking those trails for nearly 7 years. They wind around a shallow river, cross through an old pine grove, and eventually connect to a protected nature reserve. I know that forest better than I know some neighborhoods. I know which paths flood after a storm. I know where the deer usually cross. I know every broken fence post, every exposed root, every tree that's been struck by lightning. I had never gotten turned around out there. Not once. Then about a month ago, I went hiking alone after work. It was the same route I'd taken hundreds of times. I followed the river for a while, climbed a small hill, and rounded a bend near a group of cedar trees. That's when I saw the cabin. It was sitting maybe 40 yards from the trail. And I need you to understand something. There should not have been a cabin there. I've explored that part of the woods from nearly every direction. There are no houses, sheds, hunting shelters, or abandoned buildings anywhere nearby. But there it was. It looked old, though not exactly neglected. The walls were made of dark timber, and a narrow brick chimney leaned slightly to one side. There was a small porch with a single rocking chair. The wind was strong enough to shake the branches above me, but the chair didn't move at all. What unsettled me most were the windows. They were perfectly clean, not dusty, not streaked, not clouded with age. They looked freshly polished. There was no path leading to the cabin, no flattened grass, no boot prints, no vehicle tracks. Nothing to suggest anyone had ever approached it. Still, I walked over. I knocked on the front door. No one answered. I tried the handle, but it was locked. At that point, I took out my phone. I thought I'd snap a picture and send it to a few friends. I figured they'd tease me for somehow overlooking an entire building for all those years. I took one photo. Then I turned back toward the trail. A few seconds later, I glanced over my shoulder. The cabin was gone. It wasn't hidden behind the trees. It wasn't difficult to see from that angle. It was simply gone. There was nothing there except ferns, pine trunks, and a patch of dead leaves. I searched the area for at least half an hour. I walked in circles, checked the riverbank, and compared the trees to what I remembered seeing. Nothing. When I got home, I opened the picture. It showed an empty forest. No porch. No chimney. No cabin. For a few days, I convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. I told myself I was tired, stressed, distracted. Anything sounded better than the truth. The following weekend, I returned with my cousin. We walked the same trail and stopped at the exact bend where I'd seen it. There was nothing there. My cousin laughed and said maybe I'd found a doorway to another world that only opened on weekdays. I laughed too. I didn't tell him how frightened I actually was. The next evening, I went back alone. The cabin was there again. Same place, same dark walls, same spotless windows. Only this time, the front door was open. I knew I should leave. I wish I had. Instead, I stepped inside. The air had a strange smell. It wasn't mold or decay. It smelled like old wood, wet earth, and a faint trace of floral perfume. There was almost no furniture, just a wooden table, a single chair facing the front window, and a candle that had burned down close to the base. In the middle of the table was a notebook. I picked it up and opened it. Every page was covered in handwriting. My handwriting, not something close to mine. Mine. The same uneven spacing, the same slanted letters, the same way I press too hard with the pen when I'm writing quickly. Even the dates were written exactly the way I write them. But the entries were from years ago. They described hikes I had never taken and conversations with people I didn't know. Some pages sounded ordinary, almost like diary entries. Others were impossible to understand. One page contained a single sentence written over and over until the ink had nearly torn through the paper. He only arrives when he is alone. I dropped the notebook. I backed out of the cabin without turning away from it. The moment I reached the trail, I looked back. It was gone. Since then, I've tested it more times than I'm comfortable admitting. Whenever someone comes with me, there's nothing there. I've brought friends, my cousin, even 2 people from a weekend walking club. The cabin never appears. But when I go alone, it's waiting. Every time. And each time, it's closer to the trail. At first, I thought I was imagining the distance. Then I started using trees and rocks as markers. I wasn't imagining it. The cabin was moving. A little over a week ago, I found another notebook inside. There was a photograph tucked between 2 pages. It showed me sleeping in my bedroom. The picture hadn't been taken through a window or from the doorway. It had been taken from the end of my bed. You could see the lamp beside me, the glass of water on the nightstand, and the thin crack running across the ceiling. I live alone. I didn't tell anyone about the photograph. I knew how it would sound. A few nights later, I woke up with dirt packed beneath my fingernails. There were pine needles scattered across the sheets. My hiking shoes were sitting beside the front door, completely covered in mud. I had no memory of leaving the house. Yesterday, I told myself I was going back one final time. The cabin was no longer hidden among the trees. It was almost touching the trail. The door stood wide open. Inside, the old notebook was gone. A new one had been placed on the table, already open to a blank page. A pen rested beside it. When I picked it up, it was warm. Not slightly warm. It felt as though someone had been holding it seconds before I arrived. What happened next is difficult to explain. One moment, I was standing beside the table. The next, I was sitting in the chair. The pen was in my hand. Half the page had been filled with my handwriting. I don't remember writing any of it. It said, "He is beginning to understand. He comes alone because solitude makes him easier to open. He thinks the cabin appears for him. He is mistaken. The cabin is what remains when he is gone." That was when I looked through the window. The forest outside had changed. The trees were much taller and packed so closely together that I could barely see between them. Everything had a dull, violet-gray color, as though the sky itself had been bruised. The river was gone. The trail was gone. There were no birds, no insects, no wind. Nothing moved. I ran outside. The real forest had disappeared. I wandered through those trees for what felt like hours. My phone battery dropped from 72% to 2% in only a few minutes. There was no signal, no compass, no map. Eventually, I stumbled onto the real trail. The sun was setting behind the ridge. When I checked my watch, only 13 minutes had passed. I somehow made it home. I barely remember the drive. What I remember clearly is standing in the bathroom afterward, staring into the mirror and trying to convince myself I was exhausted. Then the reflection behind me smiled. I didn't. This morning, I found fresh pine needles scattered across my bedroom floor. There was another notebook on my nightstand. I know I didn't bring it home. The first page says, "He is nearly ready. The next time he arrives alone, he will remain." There is already another version of him sitting in the chair. I haven't gone back. I keep telling myself I never will, but the forest has become strangely quiet. Even from my house, I can feel it. It's as though the woods are listening. Last night, I found myself packing my hiking bag. Water, batteries, a flashlight, a medical kit. I don't remember deciding to do it. I only became aware of what I was doing after the bag was already packed. So, if you've ever experienced anything even remotely similar, please tell me. I don't care how unbelievable it sounds, because I no longer think the cabin has been appearing for me. I think I've been appearing for the cabin. I've been thinking about a few strange things that happened when I was growing up, and I wanted to share them in case someone else has experienced anything similar. My earliest memory happened when I was about 4 years old. My mom and I were sitting on the living room floor beside a pile of blankets and sofa cushions. The room was dim, and most of the light came from the pale glow of the tablet we were using to watch videos. At some point, I turned toward the hallway. There was a family standing there. I remember 4 figures: a man, a woman, and 2 children. The children looked like a brother and sister. They stood close together, almost like they were posing for an old family photograph. But they didn't look completely human. Their bodies were transparent and surrounded by a bright blue glow. It reminded me of a hologram, except they seemed solid enough to be real. I could see their faces, their clothing, and the shapes of their bodies, but everything was tinted blue. They were already watching us when I noticed them. One of the children slowly raised a hand and waved at me. Without really thinking, I waved back. Then I looked at my mom and asked, "Who are those people?" She glanced toward the hallway and said, "What people?" I pointed and told her there was a family standing there, looking directly at us. She couldn't see them at all. My description frightened her, and she told me to stop trying to scare her. After that, she turned her attention back to the screen. But I kept looking. The family remained there for a little while, completely silent, before fading away. A few years later, the strange experiences became less visual and much more frightening. Twice in the same week, I woke up late at night to violent pounding on our front door. It wasn't a gentle knock. It sounded as though someone was hitting the door with both fists. Between the pounding, I could hear faint voices whispering in the corridor outside. I would lie completely still beneath my blanket, barely breathing. I had this overwhelming feeling that I must not respond. As a child, I believed that acknowledging the sounds would allow whatever was outside to enter the house. Staying silent felt like the only way to protect myself and my family. The kitchen was another place where unusual things happened. In the middle of the night, I sometimes heard the faucet squeak and turn on by itself. A few moments later, Dishes would begin sliding across the counter. Then came the sound of plates and glasses crashing onto the floor. The noise was so loud and convincing that I expected to find the entire kitchen destroyed. But every morning, everything was exactly where it belonged. There was never any broken glass, water on the floor, or sign that anything had moved. Eventually, these experiences became strangely normal to me. I was still frightened, but I never told my parents the full extent of what was happening. I worried they wouldn't believe me, or that speaking about it might somehow place them in danger. Not long afterward, our family moved to another country. The experiences stopped, but the memories never completely left me. Even now, I still wonder about the blue family in the hallway. Has anyone else ever seen people who appeared bright blue, transparent, or almost holographic? And what could cause sounds like pounding doors, whispering voices, and breaking dishes when there is never any physical evidence afterward? I want to share something that happened years ago, because even now, I still find myself thinking about it. I'm not telling this story to prove that ghosts are real, and I'm not claiming that what happened was definitely supernatural. I'm simply sharing what my family witnessed as honestly as I can. This happened in Agra. The girl involved was a class 12 student at my mother's school. For privacy, I'll call her Nishita. According to her family, Nishita was walking home one afternoon near Fatehabad Road when a small girl approached her and asked for a piece of candy. Nishita happened to have one in her bag, so she gave it to her and continued home. Not long after she arrived, she suddenly collapsed. When she regained consciousness, her family felt that something about her had completely changed. Her voice sounded much younger, almost like the voice of a little child. She cried uncontrollably, became aggressive, threw objects around the house, and damaged several things, including a kitchen appliance. What frightened them most was that she did not seem to recognize her family in the usual way. Her parents consulted doctors, religious figures, and several other people. At some point, they came to believe that the childlike personality speaking through Nishita called herself Vidya, an 8-year-old girl who had died many years earlier. They also said that, had Vidya lived, she would have been close to Nishita's age by then. The family took Nishita to several religious places, including a temple known for cases involving supposed possession. She was also hospitalized and spent some time under intensive medical observation. Nothing seemed to help immediately. After several weeks, however, she gradually began returning to normal. Eventually, she came back to school to sit for her final examinations. My mother spoke with her personally. She said Nishita looked very weak and exhausted, but otherwise seemed calm and completely normal. Then, after finishing a 3-hour examination, Nishita walked outside the examination room and fainted again. The teachers carried her downstairs, gave her first aid, and contacted her parents. My mother was present when Nishita's mother arrived. She placed a hand on her daughter's head and said something like, "Vidya, you had already gone. Why have you returned?" Almost immediately, Nishita opened her eyes and began screaming. My mother said the voice that came from her did not sound like her usual voice at all. It sounded much younger, and her entire manner changed. She became distressed and difficult to control, almost as though another frightened child had suddenly awakened inside her. After some time, Nishita's father placed a small amount of sacred ash mixed with herbs on her forehead. Gradually, her breathing slowed, her body relaxed, and she became calm again. This story has stayed with me because it did not come from a stranger or from a rumor online. It came from my mother, someone I trust deeply, and she personally interacted with Nishita during the incident. There was another detail Nishita's mother mentioned. She believed her daughter had been especially vulnerable that day because she was menstruating, wearing strong perfume, and had put on an old top that had not been washed recently. I don't know whether any of those details had real significance or whether they were simply part of the family's attempt to make sense of something frightening. After hearing everything that happened, part of me began wondering whether ghosts or possession might truly exist. At the same time, I still want to understand the incident through science before reaching any conclusion. Could this have been a dissociative trance, dissociative identity disorder, a functional neurological condition, temporal lobe epilepsy, severe psychological trauma, or something else entirely? Have there been documented cases involving sudden changes in voice, personality, memory, behavior, and apparent recovery? I'm especially interested in psychiatric or neurological research, published case reports, and serious academic books. I would rather study the evidence than rely only on fear, belief, or personal opinion. That is why I'm sharing this story. Not to prove anything, but to understand what might have happened to that girl. My family moved into an old house in southeastern Michigan when I was about 13 years old, and from the moment we settled in, something about the place felt wrong. It wasn't just old house noises or shadows playing tricks on us. That house was genuinely haunted. My first encounter happened not long after we moved in. I was walking past the hallway when I saw a woman standing there in a pale blue dress. She looked calm and almost gentle, but before I could say anything, she disappeared. At the time, I kept it to myself. My little brother was only about 3, and every so often, he would talk about a woman in a blue dress. My mom mentioned seeing her too. None of us realized we were describing the same woman until months later, when we finally sat down and compared our experiences. There seemed to be several spirits in the house, but the woman in blue never frightened me. She felt kind, almost protective. Unfortunately, there was something else there too. Something angry. The most terrifying experience I had happened one night at around 2:30 in the morning. I walked into the family room to grab something I had left behind. There was a desk beside the doorway, and the moment I entered, everything sitting on top of it flew across the room. Then I heard a voice scream, "Get out!" It was deep, masculine, and so loud that I felt it in my chest. For some reason, I still went into the room and picked up what I had come for. I remember trying to act brave, but the whole room felt heavy and dark. I could feel something watching me. Whatever it was furious that I was there. That was the most afraid I ever felt in that house. Strange things happened constantly. I would wake up completely tucked into bed, with the blankets folded neatly around me, even though my bedroom door had been locked from the inside. I asked everyone in the family, but no one admitted to doing it. Candles would suddenly go out without a breeze. At night, we could hear cupboard doors opening and slamming shut. Some mornings, we would walk into the kitchen and find every cabinet door standing wide open. Clocks occasionally ran backward, even after the batteries had been removed. There were always footsteps, whispers, knocks, and unfamiliar noises moving through the house after dark. We also had a 2-story garage, and that was probably the most active part of the property. Whenever I was upstairs, I could hear what sounded like a crowd of people downstairs, talking, laughing, and moving around. There was never anyone there. Sometimes I had to turn the music up as loud as possible just to cover the voices. We kept an old pool table in the garage, and from outside, we would hear pool balls cracking together as though someone were playing a game. We also heard footsteps running across the wooden floor, but whenever we checked, the garage was empty. The spirits seemed especially angry whenever we changed or cleaned anything. While vacuuming, we would sometimes see figures moving at the edges of our vision. Electrical cords would somehow become wrapped around furniture on the other side of the room. Objects would disappear and turn up in places no one had been near. Even rearranging a room could trigger weeks of increased activity. My youngest brother had two imaginary friends he called Teddy and Corbin. He played with them constantly and spoke to them as though they were standing right beside him. Years later, he told us they had never been imaginary. He said he could actually see them. Things became much worse when we started preparing to move. One evening, we pulled into the driveway while no one was inside the house. Before we even got out of the car, we heard a horrible scream coming from somewhere inside. It wasn't a playful sound or the house settling. It sounded like someone was being hurt. As moving day got closer, everyone began seeing shadows and hearing voices more frequently. It felt as though the spirits knew we were leaving and were angry about it. On our final night, my father decided to stay behind and sleep on the couch. He had never believed our stories. Whenever we told him something had happened, he always found a practical explanation. That night, he heard one loud bang against the wall, then two more. A few seconds later, it sounded as though hundreds of people were pounding on every wall in the house at once. He ran out, drove straight to our new home, and told us he finally believed everything we had said. Looking back, the hauntings weren't the worst part. The worst part was what the house seemed to do to us. While we lived there, I became deeply depressed and angry. My mother suffered several serious breakdowns and was hospitalized more than once. My youngest brother became withdrawn and troubled. My other brother was constantly aggressive, and my father seemed furious at everyone all the time. It felt as though the house was slowly draining the life out of our family. After we moved away, the change was almost immediate. My brothers grew into kind, gentle people. My mother's mental health improved dramatically. My father stopped behaving with the anger he had carried in that house, and the depression I had struggled with disappeared. Later, we learned that the man who had lived there before us had been cruel and violent toward his wife. Part of me wonders whether he left something behind, or whether the house had affected him in the same way it affected us. I truly believe something inside that place fed on negativity. It didn't just frighten people. It encouraged anger, sadness, and conflict, then grew stronger from the energy it created. Every so often, I still drive past the house. Even from the road, I can feel that same heaviness, that same anger. And whenever I see lights glowing through the windows, I can't help thinking about the family living there now. I hope they never experience what we did. But deep down, I believe whatever haunted that house is still there, waiting for someone else to feed it. Hey there, I want to share with you two personal stories. Encounters that shook me to my core and left me questioning what's really out there. I'm going to tell them just like they happened, with every detail, every sound, every feeling. Because sometimes the little things make all the difference. Let me start with the first one. Picture this. I'm a 30-year-old guy, let's call me Marco, and I work from home as a technical specialist. My schedule is pretty unusual. I work nights, 12 hours long, and then I sleep during the day. So most of my life revolves around a computer screen, and honestly, it's mentally and emotionally draining. On my day off, I usually spend hours gaming or just napping to catch up on sleep because I'm always tired. Now, I've always held a quiet belief in the paranormal. I mean, ghosts, spirits. I think they're real. But until now, I'd never seen anything, never had an encounter. So on this particular day off, after gaming for hours, I decided to take a nap. My parents and sister were in the living room watching Netflix, so I had the room to myself. I lay down and drifted off, my mind wandering through the usual stuff, worrying about work tomorrow, thinking about a lost love, things like that. After a few hours, I slowly opened my eyes, and that's when it happened. Right in front of me was this tall figure. It looked kind of like a man, but not quite. It was made entirely out of smoke, shifting and swirling. The face wasn't clear, but I remember these empty white eye holes staring straight at me. It was as if this smoky shadow noticed that I was awake and saw it. I swear, I could feel it surprise itself. And then, the fear hit me like a tidal wave. It wasn't just your usual fear. It was pure, primal terror. My heart raced, my body tensed, and I felt this overwhelming urge to either fight or run. The figure suddenly raised both arms, like it was preparing to attack. I don't know why, but years of martial arts training kicked in. Maybe it sounds silly, but my first reaction was to jump up from my bed and scream as I charged at it. I wasn't thinking. Not really. The fear just took over. I lunged, aiming for its torso, and slammed right into the door. The bang was loud enough for my family to hear. They rushed in, and I was shaking and crying, clutching my sister tightly, screaming about the ghost in my room. My family, being Catholic, quickly grabbed some holy water and blessed objects and sprayed them around my room. It was comforting to have them there, supporting me through this terrifying moment. Hours later, after calming down, I explained everything to them again. None of us could make sense of what I saw, what it was, or why it seemed like it wanted to hurt me. I want to be clear about a few things. This wasn't sleep paralysis. I know what that feels like, and I was fully awake and in control. I even ran at it. My room has a Catholic altar with rosaries and images of Jesus Christ, and I don't take any medications or drugs that might mess with my mind. Yes, I'm tired. Always tired. But this was different. Now, on to the second story, which is a bit different, but just as haunting. There's a man, let's call him Daniel, who's been dealing with something strange for about 6 months. One night, he woke from a deep sleep and saw what looked like a shadowy cat crawling up his leg toward his face. At first, he thought it was his current pet, so he lazily tried to shoo it away. But when his hand touched it, he was hit by a sudden, intense electrical pain that shot through his whole body. He couldn't move, think, or even breathe. It was terrifying. Eventually, the pain stopped, and he fell back asleep. At first, he thought maybe it was sleep paralysis, but after 3 months without any incidents, the shadow cat started appearing again, more and more frequently. It got so bad that he avoided his room altogether, which frustrated his wife. One day, she decided to clean and move some items out of their room, including a very special clay disc with paw prints of Daniel's Russian blue cat, Sadie, who had been put down 7 years earlier because of aggressive cancer. Daniel hadn't been there when she passed. His parents had made the paw print for him. After the disc was moved to a storage room, Daniel started seeing the shadowy cat there. Thinking it was a coincidence, he moved the disc to another room. But the creature appeared there too. Daniel's torn. Is this really Sadie's spirit coming back to him? Or is it something else, pretending to be her? He worries that maybe she resents him for leaving her behind when he moved out of state to get married. He wanted to bring her, but she was elderly and terrified of leaving her familiar space, which led to panic attacks and seizures. He's desperate to find a way to help whatever it is find peace. If it is Sadie, he doesn't want to cause her any more pain. So, those are the two stories, smoky figures and shadowy pets, both filled with fear, confusion, and a yearning for answers. If you have any advice or thoughts on what they might be or what to do next, I'm all ears. Because sometimes, when the unknown visits, all we can do is reach out and hope for understanding. I grew up in Switzerland, and scouting has been part of my life since I was about 8 years old. Later, I became a scout leader, and every autumn our group would spend a week together at a different lodge somewhere in the country. One year, We stayed at an old scout house near Solothurn. The building was unusual because it had been built into the slope of the hill. At the back, the main common room opened almost directly onto the ground. But at the front, the same room was a full story above the path below. There were windows all around the room, but one particular window stood out. It was high above the ground, directly over the lower end of an outdoor staircase, so it would have been extremely difficult for anyone to reach from outside. It also had a heavy wooden shutter that opened outward. On our first night there, after all the younger scouts had gone to bed, the leaders stayed behind in the common room. We were talking, laughing, and playing cards. It must have been close to 11:30 when the wooden shutter suddenly slammed shut. The sound was so violent that everyone stopped talking. What made it strange was that the night was completely still. There was no wind, no rain, nothing that could have moved that shutter. Several of us had been facing the window when it happened. Before anyone had time to suggest an explanation, we all said almost the same thing. We had seen a hand. Not an arm, not a person standing outside, just a pale hand reaching around the edge of the shutter and forcefully pulling it closed. We rushed over and looked out of the window, but there was nobody there. The path below was empty, and because of the height and the staircase underneath, there was no realistic way someone could have reached the shutter and disappeared so quickly. We tried to laugh it off, but it was difficult because we had all seen the same thing. A few nights later, something even more frightening happened. In the middle of the night, I woke to the sound of someone screaming. It was not the kind of scream you make after a bad dream. It was raw and desperate, the sound of someone who truly believed they were in danger. One of the other leaders switched on the light, and that was when we saw my older sister on the floor, still wrapped inside her sleeping bag. She was several steps away from her mattress, crouched near the other side of the room. She was crying, trembling, and struggling to catch her breath. After we calmed her down, she explained what she had seen. The balcony doors had wooden shutters, and they had been left slightly open. Through the narrow gap between them, she saw a tall, dark figure moving toward the room. She could not describe its face because it did not seem to have one. She only remembered the shape and the overwhelming feeling that came with it. She said the presence felt deeply wrong. It was not simply fear. She described it as a heavy, almost physical darkness pressing against her. She screamed to wake us and then threw herself out of bed, trying to get as far away from the balcony as possible. That was why we found her across the room, still trapped inside her sleeping bag. None of us slept properly after that. We kept the lights on for the rest of the night, and every small creak in the building made someone sit up and listen. We never discovered what caused either incident. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation that we simply failed to see. But even now, I cannot forget that shutter slamming shut, or the hand that several of us witnessed at exactly the same moment. And I cannot forget the terror on my sister's face. Those nights changed something in me. Before that camp, I was unsure whether I believed in ghosts or anything paranormal. Afterward, I was no longer so certain that we are alone. Hey there, I want to share with you some stories, some personal, some from people I know, that all revolve around strange, unexplained experiences. Each one has its own eerie vibe, and I promise to take you through every detail, every shiver-inducing moment, just like I remember it or heard it. So, grab a cup of something warm and let's dive in. Let's start with a tale from back in 2006 in Patna, India. I had this cousin, let's call her Sarah. She was the kind of person who'd light up any room, always cheerful, respectful, and just so kind-hearted. She had moved to Bangalore for engineering college, which was quite a distance from home, about 1,500 kilometers. One day, the doorbell rang, and I went to open it, expecting maybe a delivery or a neighbor. But there she was, Sarah, standing there with this solemn, almost haunted look in her eyes. We all welcomed her in, asking about her journey, but she seemed confused, almost blank, about how she had gotten home. We later found out she had flown back on a plane, but she claimed she had no memory of that at all. Over the next 6 months, life became a nightmare for her and for us. Sarah started showing signs of deep depression. She stopped talking, barely ate, and sometimes her body would heat up with fever-like symptoms, accompanied by screams that tore through the night air. At night, she'd suddenly burst into maniacal laughter, or sometimes she would wail, pulling her hair out in despair. If anyone tried to comfort her, she'd lash out with a guttural, animalistic voice that was so unlike her it terrified us all. My older sister, who's a psychiatrist, stepped in and diagnosed her with depression caused by low self-esteem issues in college. She started medication, faithfully for 6 months. But nothing changed. Sarah's parents reached a breaking point, desperate for answers or any relief. They sought out a master tantric, a practitioner of the occult, someone purported to be clairvoyant and skilled in spiritual matters. When he entered our home, Sarah's reaction was immediate and intense. She screamed and wailed as if he were the source of her torment. The tantric calmly looked at her and said he'd return to perform an exorcism ritual. He instructed us to keep Sarah inside during this time. Exactly 3 hours later, Sarah began screaming again, this time trying to escape the house. It took 5 of the men in our family to hold her down on the bed. She even tried to leap from a window. Her screams drew the entire neighborhood, who gathered outside, wide-eyed and whispering. After about an hour of this chaos, she suddenly fell silent and slept soundly for 6 hours. When she woke, she was calm and asked why she was at home and not in her college hostel. She was back to her normal self, but with a big gap in her memory. She couldn't remember the last 6 months at all. We asked the tantric what had happened. He told us that a lower-class Muslim spirit called a jinn had been placed on her. Apparently, someone had attached the spirit to a strand of hair, mixed it into a traditional Muslim rice dish called biryani, and Sarah had eaten it. He even claimed to know who was behind it, but refused to reveal the identity. Later, Sarah recalled that she had a Muslim friend who had fallen in love with her. She'd politely declined his advances but remained friends. Her last memory was the day of Eid, when he invited her to lunch and served her biryani. After that, everything was blank. Sarah's parents decided she wouldn't return to that college. She continued her studies locally and eventually moved to the US, living a peaceful life now. We avoid talking about those months. It's like a shadow we don't want to wake. Now, moving across the world to central North Carolina, USA, a place filled with dense woods and wide open pastures. When I was a teenager, I was wrestling with the grief of losing a sibling and all the anger that came with it. My home life was shaky, and the woods were my refuge. I would wander there for hours, sometimes even sleeping outside if home felt unsafe. One night, after a particularly nasty argument with my family, I stormed into the woods. I was so angry that I screamed, punched a tree, and cried until everything inside me felt raw. Then, suddenly, the familiar chorus of insects went silent. The heavy summer night became eerily quiet. No crickets, no cicadas, nothing but this creeping silence. Then, a foul, almost sweet-smelling stench invaded the air. Having lived in the country, I knew the smell of dead animals, but this was different, intensely worse. Panic rose in my chest, and I spun around to head home. My instincts screamed to run, and I did, though I was no runner. I dashed across our property, hearing heavy footfalls behind me keeping pace. I couldn't see anything, just the sound and that awful odor trailing behind. I never went back into those woods at night after that. The fear lingered, and if I had to be outside, every outdoor light was on, and I kept far from the trees. Years later, a similar experience happened on a rainy night. I was driving home late, around 1 a.m., and had to swerve into a ditch to avoid hitting a dead doe lying in the road. As I passed, I caught a pair of glowing orange-green eyes in the side mirror. The figure was tall, canine in shape, soaked from the rain. My heart pounded as the same sickly sweet odor filled my car. I panicked, took a long detour, and begged my parents to turn on all the outdoor lights before I rushed inside. I never took that road again at night. I've never smelled that odor since, but those woods still feel wrong, like something doesn't want me there. Now, let me tell you about a childhood ghost sighting. When I was about 7, waiting for my mom to pick me up for school, I sat on her bed watching TV. I felt like someone was watching me, and when I looked into the hallway, I saw a black figure of an old man wearing a sombrero standing there, staring. It wasn't a friendly presence. It felt unsettling and definitely not human. I bolted and shut the door, too scared to say anything. Years later, my grandma told me she had seen the same figure twice in that very apartment, describing him exactly as I did, without knowing my story. My sister had seen him too. That place always felt sad, heavy with an awful vibe. Even visitors would say they felt uneasy. My mom never saw anything but never wanted to move, even when my stepdad urged it. I still believe in ghosts because of that experience. To this day, I never sleep with my bedroom door open. Here's another one from rural Pennsylvania, 2007-2008. I was 18, living alone in an old 2-story apartment above some friends of the family's previous place. I had 2 cats, one since I was a toddler. The oldest cat started staring and meowing at the same corner of the house, which was new behavior for her. Sometimes, late at night, I'd get these creeping feelings of unease. I'd turn on hallway lights just to feel a little safer. After 2 years, things hadn't gotten better. The TV would sometimes make a noise like someone flicking the side of the plastic, but I thought it was just a quirk of the device. The apartment had a long hallway with stairs in the middle. Across was the kitchen. To the right, a small bathroom. At the end was my bedroom. To the left was an office with a door to the attic, and a living room beyond that. Opposite the office was a large chalkboard attached to the wall. It was my command center, full of phone numbers, tasks, appointments, notes spanning 2 years, rarely erased. One weekend, a girl I was dating came over to stay. I had to work, so she did some chores. When I got home, part of the chalkboard was erased. I was furious and asked her why. She swore she hadn't touched it, but the eraser marks were obvious. We argued briefly, but then went out for dinner and a movie. When we returned, everything on the chalkboard was back. Every note, every number in my handwriting. No eraser marks. We freaked out. She cried and left to stay with her parents. I called my mom, who spoke to the friends who helped me get the apartment. They told me they'd always believed it was haunted, said their dog stared at that same corner my cat did, but never told me because they knew I would have refused to live there. Let me tell you about a house where my whole family experienced paranormal things. When I was a kid, about 7 or 8, I was at my stepmom's mother's house, a place I'd been many times before. I was watching TV in the living room when I saw a tall shadow shaped like a man walking down the hallway and disappearing into a bedroom. I was so scared I ran to the other room where the family was. I never told anyone until years later. Fast forward 10 years. I was living there again during high school. One night, my boyfriend and I were watching TV with the door open. He suddenly said, "Jody is awake." I told him no, she was asleep. He said he saw her walk down the hallway. We checked. She was asleep. He was freaked out. I told him my childhood story, and he wanted to leave immediately. My dad often saw a little girl's spirit in the house. He saw a child's head peek around the hallway corner, assuming it was my little brother, but when he checked, the kid was asleep. It happened multiple times. The spirit seemed shy, often standing close while he cooked. My stepmom was terrified, and once even said a little girl tugged her shirt in the kitchen. One night, I heard a female voice say, "Hey," behind me in the kitchen. I turned, but no one was there. Another time, my sister and her friend were in her room when all her knickknacks suddenly flew off her nightstand. They screamed in terror. Moving on to Baltimore, 2019. I lived in an old house in a working-class neighborhood. I didn't believe in ghosts, but the house creaked and things would fall off shelves. The basement flooded once, adding to the creepy vibe. One night I woke up and saw a shadow figure standing at the foot of my bed. It had a defined body, but no facial features. I thought I was dreaming, but I was awake. This happened twice. The basement always smelled faintly of natural gas. Curtains would fall, and sometimes it felt like something was chasing me out the back door. A friend visited, claiming he was sensitive to ghosts. We heard footsteps in the basement. When he asked for a sign, a nearby motion-activated floodlight flicked on and off. My friend who lived there before said his roommate saw a similar figure standing over him. The roommate lived in the basement and complained about things moving or breaking. Over time, he became irritable, which was unusual. We were all relieved when the lease ended. Finally, a story from central Indiana. I grew up in a house built before the Civil War, with hidden false walls, secret passageways from its days on the Underground Railroad. My family called the unseen presence there Mr. Cooper. When I was a kid, I never thought much of it, except that my dad wouldn't take anything upstairs after sunset and avoided the second floor. On Christmas Eve 2001, I was woken by the door opening and the window AC unit's dials clicking on and off by themselves. The door then slammed shut. My sister and I were terrified and needed the stairway light on to leave that room. Years later, during renovations, I woke to scratching and knocking noises coming when a junk-filled room behind my bed. Suddenly, a dark, featureless figure appeared by the window when car headlights swept across the room. My brother and I screamed and ran. In 2010, I was alone in the house when I heard footsteps jogging down the stairs and a door crashing into a cabinet. I fled and met my parents elsewhere. They told me they had to move across the country because of a new job. The house was eventually torn down. No one wanted to live there. I even have a weird photo of my niece taken in that house, where some say a face appears in the corner. Maybe it's just a trick of the light or a hand moving quickly. You can be the judge. So, these stories, whether from India, America, or anywhere else, show that sometimes the unexplained brushes close to us all. They remind us that the world holds mysteries, some frightening, some sorrowful, all worth remembering. Thanks for listening to these tales with me. Stay safe, and maybe keep a light on tonight. You know, sometimes our homes hold little secrets, little moments that make you pause and wonder. I want to share with you one of those moments, my third experience with something not quite explainable in the house where I live with my family. I won't dive into the first two because this one stands out the most, by far. This happened about a month ago, around 10 o'clock at night. Picture this with me. I'm in my bedroom, settled in, reading quietly on my bed. The rest of my family is in the living room, chatting or watching TV, just a few rooms away. Now, our house has this long hallway that stretches like a bridge between the main living space, the kitchen, dining, living room, and the bedrooms, which are all clustered together at the far end of the hall. My bedroom is the first on the left as you reach the end, and my bed is pushed right up against the wall closest to my parents' bathroom. That bathroom, by the way, is only accessible through their room. So there I am, the soft glow of my bedside lamp illuminating the pages of the book I'm reading, when I suddenly hear it, the subtle creak and shuffle of footsteps coming up the hall. I've lived here long enough that I can tell who's where just by the sounds around me, the way the floorboards groan or the breeze flutters the curtains. And right then, I hear someone walking steadily, coming up the hallway toward my room. They stop just outside my door. I can't see anyone from where I'm lying on my bed, but the pause is clear. Then, without a sound, those footsteps continue, turning into my parents' room. I hear the floor creak softly outside their bathroom door, followed by the unmistakable sound of bare feet against cool tile. There's this gentle rustling, like someone moving around, fixing their hair or adjusting something, for about 10 seconds. And then, silence. No footsteps leaving, no creak of the floorboards as they walk away. It's strange because I'd assumed it was my dad. He tends to shuffle when he walks. But then I hear his voice coming from the living room, followed by my mom's. So whoever was there wasn't either of them. What struck me most wasn't fear. It was more like a quiet acknowledgement. This presence knew I was there, but they were just going about their own business, calmly and gently, like a soft hello from another realm. It wasn't frightening at all, just peaceful. I lay back, my heart slowing, the house settling into its usual night rhythm. And I realized sometimes the most extraordinary things come in the quietest moments. Just a whisper down a hallway, a presence that doesn't want to scare but simply to be noticed. Hey there. I want to share a story about a trip I took to Las Vegas that turned out to be way more interesting than I expected. And not because of the usual Vegas glitz and glam. You see, I travel a bit for work, and over the years, I've developed this quirky hobby of staying in hotels that are rumored to be haunted. It's kind of like a little personal adventure for me. One of my all-time favorite spots is the Menger Hotel in San Antonio. It's got that old-world charm and a reputation that's pretty much confirmed haunted in my book. But that's a story for another time. This one's about Planet Hollywood in Vegas. So this particular trip, I had a quick job, just some field measurements to take in a hotel lobby. The hotel where I was supposed to work was fully booked, but Planet Hollywood across the street had rooms available, and honestly, it was cheap. I didn't know anything about the history or any ghost stories connected to it at the time. No ghost hunting tours, no late-night investigations, just in and out, quick and simple. The less time I spend in Vegas, the better, right? I arrived, checked in, and headed up to my room. The place was modern, clean, and comfortable. A little too sterile for my taste, considering I usually like the older, creakier kind of hotels. But it was nice enough. I dropped off my bags, then headed over to the job site to get the measurements done. Boring, straightforward work. After that, I grabbed some dinner and picked up snacks for the night. I had an early flight the next morning, so no partying for me, just settling in with some movie channels. I was sitting in my room, watching the Olympics, when I first heard it. The unmistakable sound of a key card sliding into a door slot, followed by the handle trying to turn. Now, this door was set up to auto-lock as soon as it closed, and I had also put the deadbolt on. The handle jiggled 3 times, then stopped. I didn't hear anything else and just figured maybe someone had the wrong room. That's pretty common in hotels, right? I went back to watching TV, trying to ignore it. About 15 minutes later, it happened again. This time the key card slid in a little harder, and the handle turned with more force. Then I heard whispering outside the door. I couldn't make out the words, but I swear I could imagine the voices, hushed and urgent. They tried again, really pushing on the handle, but the door stayed firmly locked. I started to feel a little uneasy, but told myself not to freak out. I'm no stranger to weird hotel noises. The Olympics were still more important. Another 15 minutes passed, and then the door sounds came again, softer this time, like someone trying to sneak in quietly. The whispers returned, but still, I couldn't catch what was being said. I got up and went to the door to see if I could peek out. No peephole, of course. I watched the handle move slightly, then retreat, then move again. It wasn't budging much because it was locked tight, but the subtle movements were enough to make my skin crawl. So I finally shouted, This room is taken," half expecting someone to say sorry or maybe explain they'd made a mistake. But there was nothing, no reply. And that's when it hit me. I couldn't hear anyone walking away. I could hear other hotel guests passing by all day, footsteps, chatter, the usual hustle. But not this time. Nothing. I went back to the bed and sat down, thinking maybe a manager would show up and sort things out. Hours passed. It got late. I was watching Big Trouble in Little China, one of those movies that demands your full attention, when it happened again. The key card slid into the slot. The handle turned. This time I was mad. I rushed to the door, flung it open, and looked out both ways down the hall. Nothing. The corridor was empty, but I could still hear whispering. I followed the sound, turning the corner, and again, nothing. That's when I got that familiar tingle down my spine, the kind of feeling I get when something unexplainable is happening. I walked back to my room, and just as I stood in front of the door, I heard the whispers again, this time coming from behind me. I whirled around but saw nothing. I slipped inside, shut the door, and as I started moving away, the card slid into the slot and the handle turned once more. By now, I was definitely unnerved. But if my stays at the Menger or the Coronado taught me anything, it's to turn that nervous energy into curiosity. Unfortunately, I didn't have any ghost hunting gear with me, just my phone, which wasn't much help. But I wanted to know what was going on, so I grabbed my phone and started looking up the hotel's history. Turns out, Planet Hollywood used to be the Aladdin Hotel, and before that, it had a couple of other names. A few people had died there over the years, and as I dug deeper, I realized the room I was staying in might be on the side of the building where some of those incidents happened. Suddenly, what had been a boring trip got a whole lot more interesting. I busted out the phone's voice recorder, hoping to catch the door sounds or whispers. Throughout the night, the door kept doing its thing, the card sliding in, the handle twisting, and the whispers never really stopped. Now, you might think those whispers were just other guests, but there was a distinct difference. You can hear and feel when someone's walking down the hall, their footsteps, their voices bouncing off the walls. This was different, softer, more elusive. Later, as I lay in bed, the wall that separated the bed area from the bathroom suddenly sounded like something heavy being dragged across the floor. Then I heard water running in the bathroom. I got up and checked. Nothing was on. The silence was absolute. I sat back down, and then I realized the sounds were coming from the wall itself, not the bathroom. The dragging noise happened a couple of times, then stopped abruptly. When morning came and I finally checked out, I felt a little sad. What started as a dull, routine night had turned into a hair-raising experience I'll never forget. Sure, it didn't change my opinion of Las Vegas. It's still not my favorite place. But the hotel itself? Comfortable beds, clean rooms, and maybe, just maybe, some ghosts to keep you company if you're lucky enough to notice. So yeah, next time you're in Vegas, consider a stay at Planet Hollywood. You might just find yourself listening to whispers and wondering who's knocking on your door in the middle of the night. Hey there, I want to share with you some odd and kind of spooky experiences I had growing up in my childhood home. It's a story that stuck with me for years, and I think you'll find it pretty intriguing. So, picture this. My family and I lived in a really cozy house from around 2006 to 2015, nestled in an old coal mining town. The kind of place where the past lingers in the air, you know? Our basement was massive, fully furnished, and honestly, it felt like my own little world. There was a TV, my computer, all my toys scattered around. It was the perfect hangout spot for me and my friends when they came over. One day, I had my best friend at the time, let's call her Emma, over at the house. We were probably between 10 and 12 years old, just on the cusp of those weird, curious years when everything mysterious seems way more real. Emma and I were both really fascinated by anything paranormal. So, living in a town with such a heavy coal mining history, we thought, why not see if there might be any ghosts lurking around? Before I get into the crazy stuff, I should tell you that Emma had already mentioned something weird about our house. Whenever she stayed over for the night, she said she'd see shadows of people holding hands, right against the wall. Just fleeting shadows, but enough to freak her out a bit. So one afternoon, we downloaded these free EVP apps on our little iPod Touches. You know, those apps that supposedly capture voices from the other side? We didn't expect much. But strangely, the app kept picking up words like coal and mine. It was bizarre because, sure, the app was probably just random, but still, those words felt oddly fitting for our town's history. Then, on another day, Emma and I decided to be a little braver. We wanted to actually communicate with the spirits. So I asked simple yes or no questions and told the ghost to tap once for no, twice for yes. I remember asking if someone was there, and right then, we heard two distinct taps coming from the bookcase against the wall. Man, that scared us so much. We were frozen, our hearts pounding, but we asked another question, and it answered again. I can't quite remember what it was, but those taps were so clear. Not long after, we grabbed a ball and set it on a table in front of us. The basement was eerily still. No drafts or anything that could move the ball. It was pretty heavy too. We asked the ghost if it wanted to play, half joking, and suddenly the ball rolled right off the table. Just like that! We both jumped back, eyes wide, breath caught in our throats. It was wild, honestly, like something out of a movie. Fast forward to my 12th birthday party. I had 4 friends over, and I told them about the possible haunting in my house. They were super intrigued, so we asked the ghost to let us know it was there by tapping or dimming the lights. At first, nothing happened. But about an hour later, out of nowhere, all the lights in the house just went off. Complete darkness. We all sat there, stunned and a little terrified, trying to figure out what just happened. There was one more moment that really stuck with me. I was alone in my room, just chilling with my iPod. Across the room, there was an outlet with a thick plug inserted, but it wasn't charging anything. The plug was firmly in the socket, no loose wires or anything. Suddenly, with my own eyes, I saw that plug unplug itself and fall out of the outlet, landing on the floor. I was across the room. How could it have possibly come out on its own? It made no sense, but it happened right in front of me. Looking back, those experiences were scary, exciting, and definitely unforgettable. Growing up in that old coal mining town, surrounded by history and mystery, my basement became a portal to the unknown. And even though I've moved on from that house, those moments still echo in my mind, reminding me that sometimes the past really does reach out to the present. Hey, I want to share something really unsettling that's been happening to me over the past few days. It's about this mysterious dark figure that keeps showing up. Now, I'm not talking about some sleep paralysis demon. You know, the ones that trap you in place and mess with your mind. I was fully awake and able to move. I could see it clearly. And it's not a hallucination either. I've dealt with those before when I'm wiped out and sleep deprived. But this presence? It's darker, heavier, and truly sinister. So, let me take you through what's been going on, day by day. Day 1. It all began after one of those brutally long days at work. I got home around 4 in the afternoon, completely drained. You know how it is, being told to run errands, only to end up waiting around for hours doing nothing. It was one of those maddening days. I tried to unwind the usual way, playing video games, chatting on the phone with my girlfriend, watching some YouTube videos. But as night fell and I finally crashed around 1 a.m., things took a weird turn. I started waking up, eyes fluttering open slowly, but I couldn't figure out why. It felt like my body was preparing for something, like some signal I couldn't quite grasp. Then, out of nowhere, I heard this jangling noise, keys loudly clinking, as if someone was desperately trying to find the right one to my room in a panic. My eyes snapped open, and right behind me stood this dark figure. It moved so fast, rushing towards me with a terrifying intensity. I was frozen for a second, then I jumped up, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The figure instantly backed off and faded away into the shadows. I was gasping for breath, my pulse racing, and without thinking, I scrambled for the light switch. I looked around, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen, but there was nothing, just the quiet darkness of my room. I downed some water to calm myself, turned off the lights, and finally tried to get back to sleep. Day 2. It happened again, eerily similar. The keys jangling, the dark figure charging at me, that same rush of terror. But as soon as I stood up, it would vanish without a trace. I started questioning my sanity. I've seen things like this before, during my childhood. Spirits, hauntings, even conversations with entities. But those stopped when I was about 14. I thought I was done with this stuff. That chapter closed. Yet here we were, the fear creeping back in, like whatever haunted me as a kid had returned. I couldn't shake the voice in my head, the one riddled with hateful thoughts about myself and others. It felt louder, more persistent. Day 3. Last night was the worst. I'd just finished a grueling 24-hour shift and collapsed into bed around 4 a.m. I was barely asleep for 15 minutes when the keys jingling started again, but this time, it was closer. So close I could feel its breath on my neck. I swear, the heat radiating from its body was tangible, and the hatred it carried was suffocating. I jerked my head around, but there was nothing there. My heart was hammering, and fear clamped down on me like a vice. I flicked on the TV for some light and rearranged my pillows so I'd face the door, no longer turning my back to it. I'm sitting here now, trying to calm down, hoping it doesn't come back tonight. The figure feels more aggressive with each visit. I also want to share a story from when I was a kid about my first real ghost encounter, something I call the Beast. It's different from all the other spirits and shadows I've encountered over the years. More violent, more aggressive. The Beast stayed with me in my old house, but after I moved, it never followed. I was about 7 years old, living in Arecibo, Puerto Rico. I didn't know much about ghosts or demons back then. I hadn't even seen a horror movie. I was just a kid, innocent and unaware of what was about to enter my life and change me forever. I had a rough childhood: insomnia, ADHD, asthma, and a heart murmur. I first lived in a small apartment next to my great-grandma's house and my grandparents' gas station. Later, we moved to a larger neighborhood that was still being built up, right around the time my parents began their divorce. During that turbulent time, my beloved cat, he was an outdoors cat, a fierce little hunter who kept snakes and scorpions at bay, was poisoned. One stormy night, my mom woke me up, crying uncontrollably. She took me to the garage, where my cat lay in his bed, cheeks stained green from the poison. We never found out who did it, but I hated whoever was responsible with every fiber of my being. I was devastated. By the time I got home from school the next day, he was gone. My grandma was burying him in the yard, like we'd done for all our pets before. A few weeks later, life was settling down a bit. My brother was coming over for a sleepover, and my mom had just received 2 cats from a coworker, Zach and Chester, to help lift her spirits. That night, my brother and I played with Legos past 10 p.m. Eventually, my mom told us to go to bed. We brushed our teeth, turned off the lights, and then, right there in the corner of the room, we saw it. A bright white figure with an indescribable shape. Something that looked like a creature but wasn't quite any animal I knew. It felt terrifying. We screamed in terror, My brother sprinted to turn the lights back on, and the figure vanished. Even though we were trembling, when we turned the lights off again, it didn't come back. That was just the beginning. In the following days, I started feeling a dark, ominous presence. At first, toys would fly out of my closet to the other side of the room. I thought it was just me, so I ignored it. But soon, the toys were thrown directly at me, objects shattered, and the fear grew. My parents thought I was causing the chaos, but I kept telling them it was the things. Sleep became impossible. I was terrified in my own home, a 7-year-old fearing for his life. My mom dismissed it as nightmares or imagination, but I knew better. This was real. When I moved to the United States at 10 years old, the beast stayed behind. I haven't seen it since, and I hope I never do again. Years later, after my mom remarried and we moved to Clinton, Mississippi, a sleepy town surrounded by endless woods, the hauntings shifted. I lived in a small trailer park with my cats, Zach and Roxy. Chester had died in Puerto Rico after being hit by a car. At first, I thought I was free from the hauntings, but then the strange presence returned. My cats would stare at walls or meow at empty air. Animals can sense things we can't. The next thing to arrive were the echoes. These were voices, male and female, calling my name from the woods, sometimes from inside the house. They were trying to lure me somewhere dangerous. I never followed. One night, while showering, I heard my name called in a soft, feminine voice that sounded like my mom's, but she wasn't home. I was alone and terrified. I hid in my room with all the lights on until she returned. Sometimes I woke up with scratches, deep and jagged, like fingernail marks, not from my cats. I slept with lights on, terrified of what lurked in the dark woods that surrounded my home. I felt countless eyes watching me, driving me nearly insane. The echoes never showed any physical form, so I knew they weren't the ones scratching me. Then I saw something new, the hand. One night, while grabbing snacks in the dark, I saw a ghastly hand reaching out of my bedroom door. It was dark orange, with rotting, falling off fingernails, truly disgusting. The echoes whispered, but I couldn't understand. I screamed and called my mom, who stayed on the phone until she got home. She never believed me, thinking I was hallucinating. The hauntings worsened, and I was breaking down mentally. But there were more horrors, the orb, the voices, which eventually overwhelmed me completely. Switching gears, I want to share a story from a friend who's in the US Army about strange happenings on their base. There's this 3rd floor in their company building that's unused due to black mold, and during the day it's quiet. But at night, anyone on a 24-hour CQ shift has reported eerie activity. Loud noises, footsteps, banging. The building dates back to the Korean War, and there's a dark rumor about a female soldier who died there under tragic circumstances involving intoxication and an attempted cover-up. No one knows if it's true, but the presence is undeniably felt. One friend explored the 3rd floor once and found a room mysteriously open, filled with children's toys. He ran away fast. Another soldier went up at night, and as soon as he arrived, the lights flickered and he heard footsteps. He grabbed some toilet paper from that floor, because the others were out, and bolted downstairs. Finally, I want to tell you about Lillian, not a ghost, but a presence all the same. When I first moved to Orlando, I rented a room from a kind older couple. I got married and needed a place for us both. We found this tiny old house with a landlord who didn't want to bother fixing much, but the basics worked. A few weeks after moving in, the landlord's wife told us her mother had just passed, and they were taking her back to the old country. The atmosphere in the house shifted slightly. It felt different, though nothing overtly strange happened at first. I found a beautiful brooch under the porch's rotten boards and placed it on the mantel, planning to return it to the landlord. That's when the odd things began. My wife started noticing our wedding keepsakes, glasses, knives, photos, were being moved around. She blamed me, but I swore I wasn't touching them. Yet every time we moved them back, they'd be rearranged again. Eventually, she gave up fighting it. One day, while dusting, I try to help out, I noticed a breeze that wasn't from any fan. It made me think maybe Lillian, the landlord's mother, was behind the strange movements. My wife thought I was crazy, chalking it up to my imagination. When I returned the brooch to the landlord's wife, she turned pale, revealing it was her mother's brooch, lost when she was a kid. The woman laughed and thanked me warmly. But as I walked back to the house, I saw a shadowy figure behind the lace curtains. I tripped on a rock, and when I looked again, it was gone. Later, my wife complained of hearing footsteps and little noises. I teased her about mice, but she insisted it sounded like tiny feet. From then on, strange movements and flickers of light became a part of our daily life. Sometimes I'd catch out of the corner of my eye a flicker of movement, not quite a shadow, but something moving from the kitchen to the bathroom, a path where light shouldn't travel. So, yeah, that's been my experience with the dark, the haunted, and the unexplained. It's scary, exhausting, and sometimes feels like it's never going to end. But sharing it with you makes it a little less lonely. Thanks for listening. Hey, I want to share with you a story from when I was living in Piqua, Ohio, back in my late teens and early 20s. It was at 410 East Ash Street, this old 2-story house with 4 bedrooms, a cozy living room, dining room, 2 bathrooms, and a basement. But not just any basement. This one had a dirt floor and a tunnel that looked like it had been part of the Underground Railroad. The house itself was built sometime after the massive flood of 1913, but there had been a house on that very spot dating back to 1832. That old house was destroyed by the flood, but the land's history seemed to linger in the air. Now, this house always had this eerie vibe that I couldn't quite shake, but I was pretty skeptical about ghosts. I mean, if they were real, surely my grandma would have come to visit me, right? We lived there about a year, and nothing unusual happened at first. Then one night, my wife's sister Stacy came running into the house, all panicked and breathless. She said something had chased her up the stairs and then started wiggling the door handle. Now, Stacy and her friends were always getting drunk on weekends, so I just laughed it off. "Stacy," I said, "you're probably just imagining things after all those drinks." A week later, our 5-year-old son said something that sent a chill down my spine. "There were legs with no body following you and Mom into the bathroom." I tried to brush it off, telling him it was probably just his imagination, maybe scared because of what his aunt had said. But I felt that shiver run up my own spine. Still, I held on to my skepticism. Then one night, my wife woke me up, whispering, "Do you hear the TV knocking?" I rolled over and said, "No, it's probably just the old TV making that cracking noise as it powers down." This was an old tube TV, the kind you turn on and off with a knob. I shrugged it off again. Weeks passed, and I had just finished a grueling 12-hour overnight shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Fun times, right? I sat down at the dining room table, trying to relax, when suddenly I heard children running and laughing upstairs. I woke my wife, who was sleeping in the recliner because she refused to sleep upstairs after the TV knocking incident. I asked her, "Tiff, why are Sydney and Travis running around upstairs?" She looked at me and said, "They're not. They're asleep under the covers on the floor." I was stunned when I checked. Sure enough, they were fast asleep. I thought maybe I was just tired and hearing kids outside or something. About a week later, my wife and I had a heated argument. We were yelling back and forth, and I told her to go turn the damn TV off. When she did, I noticed a shadow, about 7 feet tall, shaped like a person. I got goosebumps just thinking about it now. At first, I thought maybe it was just a shadow from the TV light, but when she switched it off, the shadow was still there. It was so dark, I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. I waited for her to walk in front of it to see if the shadow would change shape, but it didn't. I shouted, "There's something behind you!" She jumped into bed and hid under the covers. I kept watching, and suddenly, faster than lightning, this shadow, darker than any darkness I've ever seen, rushed toward the TV and turned it on. It was like a scene from a movie, a black mist flowing into the TV, flicking it on. I couldn't believe my eyes. I quickly turned on the light and told my wife to turn the TV off because the shadow was looking right at me. We left the light on and slept with it on that night. The next morning, I still felt like maybe I was imagining things, so I asked my wife if she remembered what happened. That's when I knew. Whatever this was, ghosts or something else, it was real. Years after we moved out, we started delivering newspapers for the Piqua Daily Call. One day, there was a special issue dedicated to the people affected by the 1913 flood. As I flipped through, I saw our old house, 410 East Ash Street. The article mentioned that 2 little girls had drowned on that property long ago. Just thinking about that still gives me chills. Looking back, I realize we weren't just living in a house. We were sharing it with shadows of the past. That shadow, darker than the darkest night, wasn't just a trick of light. It was something else entirely. Something that still haunts my memories to this day. You know, there was this one evening when I was working the late shift at this tiny neighborhood store, and something really odd happened. I was just moving slowly through the aisles, straightening up products and nudging everything forward on the shelves. It was the usual routine, but then, out of nowhere, I got this strange, prickly feeling, as if someone was watching me. Now, I had heard the stories before, you know? Like the cooler doors that would unlatch and latch all on their own, even though there was only one person in the building, nowhere near those doors. And mysterious sounds that would come from certain parts of the store at odd times. But honestly, those thoughts hadn't crossed my mind for weeks leading up to that night. Right at that moment, I knew it wasn't a coworker. Why? Because I could hear all of them chatting and laughing in the office behind me. I was usually the last person out on the floor, facing the aisles, especially on closing nights, since I was one of the lower-ranking folks there. So it wasn't unusual that I was alone out there. I quickly glanced around, making sure no one was nearby. Then I turned back toward the front of the store, and that's when it hit me. The unmistakable feeling that someone was right behind me, just peering over my shoulder. Now, I could have freaked out, but I decided to be friendly instead. Maybe talking to it would ease my own nerves. So, I whispered, trying to sound calm. "Hello, I'm just straightening things before we close for the night. Don't mind me." For what felt like half a minute, that presence just kept watching over my shoulder. It was eerie, sure, but honestly, the feeling I got wasn't malicious or scary. It felt curious, like it was just checking that I was putting everything back the right way. Then, out of the corner of my left eye, I caught movement near the front of the store. I turned just in time to see a woman, a pale woman with light-colored clothes and blonde hair, walking quickly across the front, heading toward the entrance. Now, we had been closed for at least 15 or 20 minutes by then, and this little store doesn't have many places to hide. So I thought it was probably my coworker, the last cashier who'd been working up front. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I called out her name and hurried toward the front, thinking she'd just forgotten something and was coming back for it. But then, something made me freeze in place. I heard her voice calling back from the office, asking me what I needed. That's when my heart was really pounding. If she was in the office, Then who was walking up front? Snapping out of my shock, I ran the last few steps to the front to see if there was anyone there. But there was nothing. No one. The store was silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Not wanting to be caught off guard, I quickly checked all the usual hiding spots, behind the counters, near the shelves, but no one was there. That prickly feeling came back, stronger this time, and I jogged back to the office, still trying not to believe what I'd just seen. I asked a cashier I thought I'd seen if she'd been looking for anything up front, secretly hoping she was a sprinter I didn't know about. But she had been in the office the whole time. There were only 3 other people in the store besides us, and none of them looked anything like the woman I'd seen. Plus, the figure was much taller and lighter than her, and I couldn't recall hearing a single sound from someone walking so quickly across the front registers. I even asked if one of the guys would come back up front with me to double check, but they just shrugged and shuffled uncomfortably. They said if I couldn't find anyone, then there was no one there. And honestly, I have never seen our closing crew wrap things up so fast as we did that night. Looking back, I kind of chuckle at how scared I was. The spirit, if you want to call her that, seemed gentle and thoughtful, maybe even trying to be helpful. I think the disappearing act just caught me off guard. But after that, strangely enough, I actually felt more comfortable working alone at night, knowing she was there, watching over the place, completely harmless. Hey, I want to share this story with you. Something that's been with me since I was a kid. Something I haven't really talked about much until recently. So, I was born in 1983, and this happened when I was around 5 years old, which would put us in 1988. I was over at my friend Josh's house. He lived just 2 doors up from me, which for a 5-year-old felt like the farthest place I could go on our street. Luckily, most of my closest friends were all within that small little corner of the neighborhood, so I spent a lot of time there. Josh and I were hanging out in his basement. Now, his basement was finished, cozy, with this warm, brownish carpet that felt soft underfoot, a big fireplace that gave the whole room a kind of snug glow when it was lit, and a massive TV that we'd watch cartoons on. We usually spent our mornings there, right before or just after breakfast, with Josh's mom keeping an eye on us from the kitchen nearby. His baby brother Nathan was usually around too. We grew up hearing ghost stories, you know? It was just kind of part of life back then, especially with older kids around and my 2 older brothers telling their tales. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared us for what we saw that day. We ended up calling it the blonde thing because, well, that's what it looked like to us. So picture this. Josh and I are sitting on the carpet, playing with action figures, the TV humming softly in the background. We're laughing and just having a good time. Then, out of nowhere, we notice movement about 10 feet away, near the far side of the room. The basement was empty except for us. His mom was upstairs, close to the top of the stairs in the kitchen, looking after Nathan. We both just stopped and looked toward where the movement was. And there it was, this really short figure, maybe about 3.5 feet tall, moving around the corner and down the short hallway leading to the back bedroom of the basement. The way this figure moved was so strange. It was bobbing its head from side to side, almost like a kid skipping or playfully bouncing along. What really got us was the hair. It was incredibly long, longer than anything I'd ever seen on a person that small, and it was the lightest blonde, almost white, cascading down over the shoulders and all the way to the floor. The hair seemed to shimmer a little, catching the light in a way that made it look almost unreal. We never really saw a face, or any clothes, just that long, flowing hair draped over something that looked like a little girl-shaped figure. We stared for maybe 3 seconds, but those seconds felt stretched out, like time slowed down just enough for us to realize how weird and scary this was. Then, without thinking, we both screamed and bolted up the stairs, our hearts pounding like crazy. I remember thinking, what the heck was that? But we didn't have words for it back then. All we knew was that it was creepy and unlike anything we'd ever seen. From that day on, whenever we talked about it, we just called it the blonde thing. It became this mysterious little secret between us. Years passed. I didn't think about the blonde thing for a long time, probably not since I was a teenager. Then, out of the blue, in 2018, Josh sent me a friend request on Facebook. We hadn't really been in touch since middle school, so I was surprised. When I opened his message, it was the usual, "Hey, how have you been?" kind of thing. But then, at the very end, he wrote, "Remember the blonde thing?" And just like that, all those memories came flooding back, just like in those movies where the characters get that call that tells them the nightmare isn't over. Turns out, we saw it once more. This time, outside in the backyard of our neighbor Leota's house. We both saw the same skipping, short figure with that almost white hair trailing down to the ground disappear into the woods behind the yard. It was exactly the same. Of course, I tried to look it up, see if anyone else has ever seen anything like this. The closest I found was some old Germanic folklore about long-haired blonde entities that look like little girls and are said to try and steal babies from homes. Creepy stuff. Honestly, I'm still curious if anyone else has seen something like this, or if it was just some strange childhood hallucination. But I know what I saw, and I know how real it felt. Thanks for listening. Hey, I want to share a story with you. Something that happened back in the early 90s when I was working at this old movie theater in Worcester, Massachusetts. The place was kind of magical, or at least I thought so. It was built way back in 1926, called the Poli Palace then, and it had this grand vaudeville and movie vibe, seating for 2,500 people. Over the years, it changed hands, and by 1959, Showcase Cinemas took over and modernized it, but you could still feel the echoes of its past in every corner. I was the assistant manager, which meant I had keys to every spot. I spent hours exploring, from the creepy basement, cluttered with old newspapers, shards of broken crystal sconces, and all kinds of forgotten debris, to the ceiling above the auditorium where you could see the wood beams creak. There was this old music store and a ballet studio on the second floor, long walled off and left untouched. And then there was the abandoned bathroom and the manager's old office, where back in the 40s, managers were once held at gunpoint during a robbery. The building had stories, and I was obsessed with uncovering them. I even went to the public library to dig through every newspaper article I could find. There was this rumor about a stagehand who supposedly died from a fall, but I never found any solid proof. No article, no record, just whispers. One day, my mom called me with something strange. She'd met a woman at her work who claimed to have psychic abilities, someone who said she got feelings about places and people. Knowing how much I loved the theater, my mom asked if she'd ever been there. She told the woman it was said to be haunted, and about my search to confirm the stagehand story. The woman said something that stuck with me. She said, "I get the feeling it was someone with a name that starts with the letter M." I laughed it off. I've never really bought into psychics or their so-called powers. I figured it was just coincidence, or maybe a guess. Then, not too long after, I was the only manager on duty one slow weeknight. The 7 o'clock shows had started, and I was sitting in the basement offices. Funny thing, the space used to be a big men's room back when the theater was first built. It had this eerie vibe, quiet but heavy in the air. Suddenly, the office phone rang. The cashier up front called me on the intercom and said someone was on the main line asking for me. I pressed the button and picked up the receiver. The moment I did, my ear was hit by this awful, loud electronic squealing and static, like a radio trying to tune in but never quite getting there. I cleared my throat and said, Hello? A man's voice answered, calm and quiet. Just one word. Hello. Then silence, except for the static noise. I repeated, hello? Trying to get more from the caller. Again, the same calm voice said, hello. No emotion, no change, just the word. I was starting to get nervous, so I asked, who is this? There was a pause, the static crackled louder, and then came the voice again. This is Michael. Flat, monotone, like someone reading from a script but with no feeling behind it. I blinked, heart racing a bit. Michael who? I asked, hoping for some clue. Then the line went dead. Just silence and dead air. I called the cashier back and asked if she knew who it was. She said the caller didn't identify themselves to her but had specifically asked for me. She said they hadn't called back. This was before caller ID was a thing, so no way to trace it. Michael is a pretty common name. We actually had 2 Michaels working at the theater, but neither recognized the voice, and both said they didn't make the call. The strange electronic squealing never happened again. Later, I remembered what the psychic woman said about a name starting with M. It gave me chills. Was it a prank? Maybe. But if it was a well-played one, because here I am, decades later, still thinking about that night and that strange phone call from someone named Michael. It's one of those moments that sticks with you, you know? The kind of mystery that never fully lets go. Hey there, I want to share with you some stories from my past that still linger in my mind. The kind that make you pause and wonder about the things we can't quite explain. I hope you'll feel the chills and the curiosity as I tell them, just like I did living through them. First, let me take you back to the late 1990s. My then fiancée, Linda, and I were visiting Savannah, Georgia, a city dripping with history and whispers of the supernatural. We stayed at this charming bed and breakfast, nestled in one of those picturesque squares that Savannah is famous for. The house itself was a beauty, built way back in 1870, filled with antique furniture that creaked just enough to remind you of its age. Our innkeeper, Annette, was the kind of person who made you feel instantly at home. She was warm, talkative, and full of stories about Savannah and the house itself. She casually mentioned that there were some unexplained happenings here and there, some even in the very room where we were staying. Now, the bathroom had this clawfoot tub with a shower, and one morning after my shower, I stepped out, glanced at the mirror, and froze. The mirror was fogged up, of course, but there was something eerie about my reflection. The moisture on the glass caught the light in such a way that my pupils appeared gigantic, completely black and soulless, like something out of a nightmare. For a moment, it was like staring into the eyes of a demon. My heart was pounding. I jumped back, startled by the sudden darkness in my own reflection. But then, my logical mind kicked in. It was just the condensation and the way the light played tricks on the glass. Still, it was unsettling, that stark contrast between the dark pupils and the rest of my normal reflection. I called Linda in to see if she noticed it too, and she did. We both stood there, puzzling over how just my pupils could look that way while everything else stayed normal. It was one of those strange, fleeting moments you can't quite explain. Savannah's reputation as a haunted city suddenly felt a little more real to me. Have you ever seen your reflection twist in such a strange way, like the mirror was hiding a secret? Now, let me tell you about a place I once called home. An old, half-fallen Georgian colonial in central Massachusetts. Built in 1901, it was a romantic wreck, the kind of place that screams history from every creaky floorboard. I was young and maybe a bit foolish at 25 when I bought it. The previous owner was a man named Victor, a local who had passed away before we moved in. I never met him, but his legacy was everywhere. in the antiques we found, in the slapdash repairs he'd made that made us curse his name on more than one occasion. One of the treasures was a dusty old Hohner accordion tucked away in the attic. We heard stories about strange happenings, apparitions, and odd noises, but I never saw anything myself. It was more a fun idea than a real fear. One night, we bought this nifty gadget to turn our regular lamps into touch-activated ones. You could tap any metal part to switch the lamp on or off, and even dim it through different brightness levels. Pretty cool, right? So, one evening, we were watching TV in the dark when suddenly, the hallway lit up. The bedroom lamp had turned itself on. I got up, walked over, and tapped it off. But moments later, it flickered back on. Then it started cycling rapidly, dim, bright, off, over and over. My fiancé and I exchanged nervous glances. It was like the lamp had a mind of its own. Trying to lighten the mood, I blurted out, "Victor, knock it off!" And just like that, the lamp went dark and stayed off. That was the only time it happened. We unplugged the device soon after, not wanting a repeat performance in the dead of night. Was it a faulty switch? Probably. But the timing? Calling out Victor's name and the lamp obeying? That still creeps me out. I don't miss that house, but I do miss the stories it left me with. Lastly, I want to share a more somber tale from my senior year of high school. I lived in rural northern Maine, in a tiny old farmhouse my dad bought near the Canadian border. The house was small, wood-framed, with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Connected was a barn, half falling apart. It was a gloomy place, full of spiders, flies, and in the fall, swarms of ladybugs. Inside the barn's outhouse, we found a ratty bearskin coat, a kind of eerie treasure that made me uneasy. There was no central heating, just a massive wood-burning stove in the basement that barely kept the cold at bay. Winters could drop to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and I got used to feeling chilled all the time. From early on, I felt uneasy in that house. My dad and his girlfriend told me about strange things they experienced, like feeling a cat walk across their legs while lying in bed, only to find nothing there. Sometimes they'd feel a touch on their hair or head while half asleep. Dad once said he felt a cold hand press on his bare thigh while sitting on the toilet. One winter night, Dad told us he'd woken to see a woman standing by his bed. She was dressed in a long gown, about 35 or 40 years old, looking at him quietly before moving to the window and fading away as dawn broke. After I moved back to Massachusetts, my friend Jennifer called me, excited and freaked out. She'd been talking to someone who knew that house was haunted. His cousin, who lived there years ago, had experienced the same ghostly touches on the hair. Hearing that independent confirmation sent shivers down my spine. I myself only felt it once, a light touch on my feet, but the whole house was a heavy, oppressive kind of creepy, even in daylight. Years later, while on vacation with my wife, I took her to see the house again. It was worse than ever. Siding torn off, junk scattered, an old pickup rusting in the yard. It felt like a place forgotten by time, marked by sadness and something darker yet. As we stood watching from the road, a man appeared between the truck and the door. He was disheveled, wearing a brown jacket, smiling and beckoning us silently to come closer. It was unexpected, eerie. My heart pounded as I floored the gas pedal and sped away, not daring to look back. Maybe it's not the house itself that's bad. Maybe places like that carry the weight of all the pain and fear that happened there. They soak it in, and it clings to the walls and shadows. I believe that house was already marked when we arrived, and we only added to its darkness. So those are my stories. 3 different places, 3 different kinds of eerie experiences. Sometimes what we can't explain leaves the biggest impression, doesn't it? Thanks for listening and letting me share these memories with you. When I first stepped into the world of the circus, I was just a kid, barely 17. But the circus life, it's this strange, magical, yet sometimes eerie world. I traveled a lot as an acrobat, performing in various hotels, dazzling crowds under sparkling lights. But there was this one circus I worked with that was quite different. It wasn't the traveling kind. It was a static circus set up in one location, but they only ran their big shows during certain seasons. In the off-season? Well, that's when things felt different. I was actually living right there, inside the circus grounds during the off-season. During the daytime, there were usually a few people around, maybe for classes or small events. But when night fell, I was often the only soul left wandering the tents and trailers. The silence was heavy, but oddly peaceful, except for a few creaks and the distant rustle of fabric in the breeze. One particular night, I was in the kitchen area, preparing my dinner. The kitchen wasn't fancy, just a small space tucked away behind a makeshift divider. Picture this: two big pieces of fabric hung like curtains, blocking off the entrance, roughly the size of a doorway. They weren't solid walls, but they did the job of hiding whatever was behind them, while still allowing someone to pass through. I finished cooking and started to walk through this fabric doorway, but suddenly, I felt it. Something solid, like a person standing firmly on the other side, blocking me. I stopped, startled. "Oh, sorry," I said casually, thinking it might be someone from maintenance hanging around late. But there was no answer. I pushed gently, and still nothing. I slid the fabric aside and looked through. Nothing. No one. No shape, no shadow, no object that could have been in my way. Just empty air. I stood there for a moment, heart thumping, trying to make sense of it. I'm a pretty logical person, so I wasn't about to let my imagination run wild just yet. I spent the next 5 minutes trying to recreate the feeling. I stepped onto the fabric, leaned my weight against it, even held the knife I'd been using close to see if it snagged or if the fabric was thicker somewhere. I tried everything I could think of, but none of it felt like that sudden, solid resistance I'd just encountered. When morning came, I talked to some of the longtime workers, curious if they had ever noticed anything strange. They told me stories, whispers about footsteps echoing in the night, faint sounds with no source, and of course, classic ghost stories that seemed to linger like a shadow over the circus grounds. It wasn't the terrifying kind of tale, but it definitely made me pause. Honestly, I still don't know what that was. Was it a ghost? Some trick of the mind? Or something else entirely? I wanted desperately to prove to myself that it was all in my head, to brush away that initial unease with logic and reason. But sometimes, no matter how hard we try, the unknown just stays unknown. And maybe, just maybe, that's part of the magic of the circus after all. Hey there, I want to share with you a story that's been on my mind for a long time now. It happened to me when I was driving my truck across the country. I'm an over-the-road trucker, which means a lot of long stretches of highway and lonely nights. This particular event took place on a dark, quiet night in early August, around 2 a.m., while I was heading south on US 93 in Nevada. I was about 30 miles north of Las Vegas, and let me tell you, traffic was almost non-existent. For at least 40 minutes, I hadn't seen a single vehicle. The only thing lighting up the road was the bright beam of my truck's headlights cutting through the darkness. I was on the phone with a good friend of mine, just chatting about random things to keep myself awake. Then, out of the corner of my eye, about 300 feet ahead on the shoulder of the road, I noticed something. At first, I thought maybe it was an old, knocked-over construction sign, or maybe a plastic bag caught in the brush. But as I got closer, the shape started to change. I could make out what looked like a person, a figure standing there. Now, this is where it really gets strange. That area is totally deserted, with nothing but miles of empty desert around. So when I was just about 5 yards away, I could see clearly. It was a young boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old. He had a school backpack on his back, and he was clutching a white plush bunny tightly to his chest with his right arm. He was just standing there, completely still, his eyes locked onto mine with a stare that was so cold and emotionless, it sent a shiver right down my spine. What really freaked me out was that he didn't even blink or flinch as my massive truck, weighing 80,000 pounds and speeding at 65 miles an hour, roared past just a yard away from him. I mean, who could stay that calm and unreactive to a giant semi-truck racing right by? My heart started pounding like crazy. Every hair on my body stood up, and a chill I can't fully describe crawled down my back. I've never felt so deeply unsettled in my life. You see, I've never had any paranormal experiences before, so this was totally new and completely unnerving. As I drove past that boy, my mind raced with worry. I thought, if I see him again a few miles down the road, I'm going to lose it. But strangely, he never reappeared. The rest of my trip was quiet and uneventful, which only made the whole encounter feel even more unreal. I still can't explain what I saw that night. I'm not saying it was a ghost or the spirit of a child who passed on. I just don't have any rational explanation for it. And I know it wasn't a hallucination because I was wide awake, talking on the phone the whole time. The desert was completely empty, and yet, there he was, standing there like a silent watcher. What on earth was a little kid doing alone in the middle of nowhere, clutching a stuffed bunny, staring at a truck barreling past him? It's a mystery I haven't solved, and honestly, it still haunts me every time I think about it. Hey, I want to share something that's been really unsettling me lately. It's about this strange, rotten smell that's been creeping into my neighborhood. And honestly, it's got me pretty on edge. I live in a fairly large city here in Ontario, not far from the outskirts, maybe 4 or 5 blocks from where the city ends and the wilderness begins. It's mostly residential where I am, with just a few small restaurants sprinkled around. Wildlife isn't unheard of, but it's usually just the smaller critters. We get deer and coyotes now and then, but bears? Those are super rare, like once every 5 years or so. So with that in mind, the smell I'm about to tell you about just doesn't seem to fit in my neighborhood. Now, over the past year, I've noticed a lot of odd things happening around me. Nothing dangerous really, just weird little things that don't quite add up. But last month, something shifted. I started feeling this really intense, predatory vibe outside my home, like something was lurking and watching, and it triggered this full-on fight or flight reaction in me. It lasted for a few days, and I even recorded some of what I experienced, but that's a whole other story for another time. After it stopped, I felt safe enough to be outside again, especially at night, which I prefer for cycling. It's quieter, calmer, and somehow feels more natural. So I got back to my late-night rides, and that's when I first noticed the smell. At first it was subtle, a faint whiff of rotting meat as I passed certain houses. I thought maybe it was just bad breath, or maybe some neighbors had trash that was really starting to decay, or even some roadkill nearby that I just couldn't see. But the smell kept popping up all over the city, and it wasn't just a one-time thing. Then, one night, that predatory feeling came back again, stronger than before, and I stopped going out at night for a while, just waiting to see if the feeling would fade. Eventually it did, so I started cycling again. But this time, the smell was worse, way worse. About 1 in every 15 or 20 houses had this awful stench, like a freezer full of meat that had been left outside and sealed up for weeks and weeks. It was beyond nasty, even worse than the garbage bins behind grocery stores. At first, I figured it was just the local dump blowing in the wind, But then a friend of mine mentioned she'd noticed the smell too. She described it exactly, like a dumpster packed with expired meat, and pointed out it only came out at night and seemed to be coming from certain houses, not just random places. What's more, she lives too far from the dump to smell it where she is. That's when things started clicking for me. After hearing her say that, I decided to investigate more closely. I started walking my sibling's dog through the areas where I'd noticed the smell. About half an hour from my place, the dog's behavior changed. He'd sniff the air nervously and pull towards certain streets, and the smell would hit me like a punch in the face. As the stench grew stronger, the dog's fur would stand on end, and he'd act like he was really on edge. This kept happening for a few nights, and soon, walking him became a challenge because he was so uneasy. One night, I took him a different route, near my own neighborhood where I hadn't noticed the smell before. Everything was fine at first, but on the way back, we cut through a park, and the dog just froze. His fur bristled, and he kept huffing the air nervously. I smelled it too. The stench was so strong. It had to be coming from one of the houses bordering the park. I wanted to get closer, but the dog refused to move forward. It was a well-lit park with open space and a paved path straight through it, so nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Still, I turned around, and the dog followed me quickly, tail tucked and fur raised. We took the long way home. I wasn't exactly scared, but I was definitely uncomfortable, both because of the smell and how my dog was acting. Then, just a few nights ago around 3 a.m., I woke up to the dog pacing in the hallway. I thought he needed to go out, so I tried to take him outside, but he seemed hesitant. When I got him out the door, he immediately turned around and whined to come back in. I stepped outside to check on him, and while he calmed a bit, he stayed close to the door. I brought him back inside and went back to bed, feeling pretty tired and unsure of what else to do. But now, tonight, the dog is being clingy like I've never seen before. And when I stepped outside to take the recycling bins out, I caught the faintest hint of that rotten meat smell again. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was enough to make me worried. I'm honestly not sure what to think. Maybe I'm just being paranoid, but this smell is so distinct and so common now that it doesn't make sense. It can't just be trash. If it were, more people would have noticed it, right? I thought maybe it was carrion, but the smell is way too frequent and specific for that. I also considered the dump again, but it's definitely too far away for the smell to reach here this strongly. Maybe there's a rational explanation I'm just not seeing. But if there isn't, I don't even know where to start trying to figure out what's causing this. One thing I can say is that I still haven't been able to pinpoint exactly which houses the smell is coming from. I can narrow it down to a stretch of about 5 houses on one street, but it could also be coming from their neighbors' backyards on the next street over. It's all so strange and unsettling. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm sharing this because I want to hear if anyone else has experienced something like this, or has any ideas. It's hard to be the only one noticing something so bizarre and worrying. Thanks for listening. Hey, I want to share this strange experience that my partner and I had during our recent trip to the Oregon coast. We were hoping for some sunshine, but the weather was pretty gloomy, so instead of sticking to the main sites, we decided to just drive and explore whatever caught our eye. Now, I come from the Rocky Mountains, so navigating winding mountain roads is second nature to me, and I usually have a pretty solid sense of direction. But what happened on this trip? Well, it threw me for a real loop. So picture this. We're cruising north on the coastal highway, just scanning for beaches to explore, when I spot this tiny road branching off. It turned out to be a Forest Service road, all narrow and a little rough looking, but paved at first, so I thought, why not? We took that turn. The road was barely wide enough for one car, winding steadily up and down a big hillside, moving northward through the thick forest. Now, if you've never been to the Oregon coast forests, imagine this. Towering trees that reach high above, but have almost no branches until the very top. The canopy is dense, blocking out a lot of light, and the forest floor is carpeted with ferns and thick underbrush. It has this eerie, almost otherworldly vibe, especially on a day like this. The woods were so quiet. Usually you'd hear a buzz of activity, birds chirping, squirrels scampering, but that day, the silence was almost heavy, broken only by the occasional bird call or the soft rustle of leaves. We stopped a few times to get pictures and even stepped a few yards into the woods, feeling that strange quiet pressing in around us. By the time the pavement ended and the road turned to gravel, the sun was dipping low and a thick fog had rolled in. It wrapped the forest in a ghostly veil, limiting our visibility to maybe 30 yards. The fog muffled the sounds, deepening that unsettling silence. Both of us started feeling a little uneasy, but we kept going. The road started sloping downward, and we figured it would eventually lead us back to the highway. After about 10 minutes of winding down through switchbacks, we came to a fork. One path turned east, the other west. We couldn't decide, so we played rock, paper, scissors. I remember the tension as we waited for the outcome, the kind of quiet anticipation you get when you're unsure of where you're headed. The right fork won, so we took that. A few bends later, the road sharply turned north. As we rounded the corner, something caught my eye, a red SUV stuck in a ditch. The front end was pointed almost straight up, as if it had slid off and flipped into this awkward position. It looked recent, but nobody was around. The SUV seemed mostly intact, but then I noticed a huge dent on the driver's side. What puzzled me was that there were no obvious obstacles nearby that could have caused that damage. No trees, rocks, or debris. It was just there. I told myself not to dwell on it, thinking maybe the dent was old and the owners had already left. We pushed on, leaving the SUV behind. About half an hour later, the gravel gave way to pavement again, and soon after, we were back on the highway. I took a right to continue north, aiming for the beaches. But then, something strange hit me. I started recognizing the road signs. They looked familiar, like I'd seen them before. My partner and I exchanged uneasy glances, both feeling this creeping sense of déjà vu. Then, as we passed the entrance to the very Forest Service road we'd driven up, it all clicked. We'd somehow circled back, ending up on the highway 5 miles south of where we'd started. Lying here now, hours later, writing this down, I still can't make sense of it. I swear we didn't turn around or head south at any point. I've looked for that road on maps, but I can't find it. The whole experience feels like something straight out of the Twilight Zone, a phantom road trip through a foggy forest that refuses to exist on any map. It's left me with a deep, unsettling feeling that lingers even now. It started with my mom, when she was a teenager. She and a few of her friends were messing around one night with a Ouija board. You know, the kind of thing people do when they think it's just a game, when they don't really believe anything is going to answer back. But something did. It told them its name was Dane. And then it gave my mom a date. Her death date. Of course, at the time, they were scared, but I think part of them still wanted to believe it was just nerves, or one of the girls moving the planchette, or their imaginations feeding off each other. But when that date came, my mom and her friends got into a car accident. They all survived, thankfully, but after that, things followed her for a while. Strange things. The kind of things that make you stop trying to explain every sound in the house. Eventually, it seemed to fade. Years later, my brothers and I were born. One of my brothers had his own experience when he was about 7. He came home one day and heard loud crashing coming from his room. He said it sounded like his speakers were being thrown around, like the whole room was being torn apart. But nobody was home. When he went in, the room was a wreck. For me, the first big thing I really remember happened when I was young too, around 7 or 8. I was home alone. My brother was outside in his car, getting ready to leave. My bedroom door started shaking. Now, that door used to move sometimes if the wind caught it just right, so I didn't panic immediately. I checked the windows. They were closed. No fans were on. Nothing was moving the air. I checked again, then a third time, because I wanted to be sure I wasn't just scaring myself. Then I ran back to my bed. The door shook again. When I looked toward it, this cold feeling came over me. Not just cold air, but that heavy kind of cold that feels wrong. I slammed the door shut and got back on my bed. Then it got violent. The door started pushing and pulling, visibly, way harder than anything normal could have done. It wasn't a little rattle anymore. It looked like something was on the other side, trying to force its way in. I called my brother crying and begged him to come back inside. The second he came through the front door, it stopped. I heard him running up the stairs, and by the time he reached the top step, everything was completely still. After that, things would come and go. In that house, I used to see what looked like a young woman in white. She wore this old-fashioned dress, almost Victorian, maybe even older looking. She never really spoke, but seeing her was enough. She looked out of place, like she belonged to a different century and had somehow ended up in our hallway. These days, it feels worse. My girlfriend and I recently moved into a new place after being homeless for a while. For the first 3 months, nothing happened. Honestly, I hoped maybe it was over. Then, last night happened. We had a couple friends over. Nothing weird was going on at first. My girlfriend and her friends left the apartment for a bit, and right after she came back through the door, the LED lights on my entertainment stand turned on by themselves. The strange part is those lights had been broken for almost a year. They stopped working after a move and hadn't lit up once since. But last night, they turned on and started flashing colors directly at my girlfriend, who has epilepsy. Then they stopped, and nothing happened for about an hour. Later, I got tired and went to lie down alone. That was the first time I'd really been in the bedroom by myself since we moved in. No girlfriend, no dog, just me in the dark. And I immediately felt watched. As I lay there, I kept hearing scratching and little noises around the bed. I thought maybe the dog had come in, so I looked over the foot of the bed. But it wasn't the dog. I saw this black shadow, almost like a person-shaped silhouette, curled up in a ball. Then it vanished under the bed, almost like dust being pulled into a vacuum. I sat back against the headboard, just frozen, trying to decide whether I had really seen what I thought I'd seen. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it because my girlfriend and I have both had experiences before, but this felt different. A couple minutes later, I noticed that static-looking darkness your eyes make when they're trying to focus in a dark room. Except in one spot, the static cleared. It looked like someone was standing there. I stared at it, waiting for my eyes to adjust, hoping it would turn into a jacket or a shadow from furniture or anything normal. But instead, it started getting bigger, closer, until it looked like it was right there on the bed. That was when I got up and left the room. I went straight back to my girlfriend and our fingers. And that's why I'm sharing this now. I want to know if anyone else has ever experienced something like this, or if anyone has heard of a spirit, entity, or presence using a name like Dane. For reference, I'm the youngest of 3. I'm 20 now, and whatever this is, it feels like it started coming after me when I was around 7. I lost my husband recently. His name was Laurent. He was French-Canadian and Abenaki, and we think he passed from complications connected to cancer, though the truth still feels foggy in places. There were difficult moments near the end that we explained away as terminal restlessness. That was the phrase that made everything easier to file away. But now, looking back, I'm not so sure. After he died, I started digging through old posts, trying to find stories about him, little pieces of our life that still had his fingerprints on them. And I came across one I had written 3 years ago about our pantry door closing by itself. At the time, I remember being startled by it. The door didn't just swing shut in some ordinary way. It wasn't physically possible, at least not in any way that made sense. Still, I tried to explain it away. I came up with a harmless theory and moved on. But what I had forgotten was Laurent's reaction. He wasn't impressed at all. He basically told me that if I knew what was happening outside, I wouldn't be getting worked up over a door. I wish I remembered every detail of what he said next. I only remember pieces of it, and those pieces have stayed strange. He used to drive home from work along this dark, wooded stretch of road. One night, he saw what looked like a glowing wolf step out into the road. It didn't run. It just stood there and stared him down, right in the headlights. Then, as his car got closer, it vanished. After that, he said something else appeared. A figure, more human-shaped, started following his car as he drove home. I don't remember exactly how he described it, but I remember the feeling in his voice. Whatever he saw frightened him badly, and I believe he told me it happened more than once. Each night, whatever it was seemed to come closer to our house. Eventually, he said he encountered it near his little shed outside, the place he used as a kind of man cave. He said it was trying to force its way in. That was not something Laurent wanted to talk about. He only described it once. After that, he shut the subject down. I later found old bookmarks and searches related to things like La Loba, but I never got the sense he thought that was the answer. He told me plainly that this was not something I could just look up. Around that same period, I noticed other things too. There were searches about doors opening and closing in the house, about why a car door might suddenly slam shut on its own. He started piling things in front of doors and windows. He stopped going out to his shed at night. At the time, I didn't connect all of it. Now, I can't stop connecting it. Laurent believed the experience was a death omen, not a general warning, not some spooky story meant for anyone nearby. He believed it was meant specifically for him. The next year, he was diagnosed with cancer. He went through treatment and made it into remission. There were no clear signs that the cancer had returned, and still, somehow, he predicted his own death. Near the end, he became intensely worried about doors and windows again. The things he had once stacked in front of them had long since been cleared away, and that seemed to bother him. He was convinced something malevolent was coming. He spent more and more time in the back rooms of the house. Quiet rooms. Secluded rooms. He would look out the windows for long stretches, watching for something I couldn't see. Then, he died unexpectedly. That is the part I keep circling back to. This was not a man who was easily frightened. He loved paranormal stories. He had no real fear of death, even after close calls earlier in life. He believed in an afterlife full of love and light. That was always his view. He had also had plenty of brain scans and neurological exams over the years for unrelated reasons, and nothing unusual was ever found. But there is one more thing I keep wondering about. The timing of that experience may have lined up with a surgery he had before the cancer diagnosis. Something went very wrong during it. He was told that what happened was one for the record books, but the surgeon never explained what that meant. I've wondered, quietly and probably desperately, whether he had to be resuscitated, whether something happened to him in that operating room that opened a door none of us understood. I don't know what to believe. All I know is that my husband saw something on that road. He believed it followed him home. He believed it was coming for him. And now that he's gone, I keep thinking about the doors, the windows, the glowing wolf, the thing outside his shed. I keep wondering whether he knew something the rest of us couldn't see.